Hagmann and Hagmann report for today. It is a terrific Tuesday edition. It's Tuesday, May 5th, 2015, 5/5/15. Interesting, huh? I'm Doug Hagmann. I'm at the helm. With me is my son, fellow investigator, co-host Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and the Hagmann report. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your belief and trust in us as we walk through this minefield of information together. Our job is to bring you the news that shapes the headlines, and I cannot think of any three better people than we have with us tonight to really bring you the news behind the news that is always being shaped, twisted, convoluted, and hidden amid a funhouse of smoke and mirrors in the carnival we call the corporate media. Folks, you're not going to hear what you're going to hear tonight anywhere else, except maybe skywatchtv.com, of course, and stevequayle.com and logosapologia.org. I just fired off 3 websites there, all linked from hagmanandhagmann.com, Steve Quayle, and from stevequayle.org, and of course Tom Horn and Cris Putnam. We have just a tremendous wow, what a great roundtable we have going. Before we get started, before we bring on everyone, I just want to mention tonight portions of tonight's broadcast are brought to you by ProFlowers, proflowers.com. Folks, you can get 100 blooms with a free glass vase for just under $20. Here's the only way to do it. You call 800-PRO-FLOWERS or go directly to their website at proflowers.com. The important thing is, whether you order by phone or through their website, you've got to input Hagmann, Hagmann, to get your discount. With Mother's Day this Sunday, it's important that we remember our mothers and do that. Now, with that, Joe, I'm going to toss it to you, and you bring on our wonderful guest here.
Glad to be here tonight. The title of the show, On the Path of the Immortals. Cris Putnam, Tom Horn, their latest book that is you can pre-order now will be, I think, available the 15th, which is a week from Friday. But go to Skywatch TV or go to Supernatural Worldview, and we have Steve from stevequayle.com with us. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get this party started.
Let's get started.
Well, great. It's kind of an exciting time because historically when Tom and I have been on together, it seems like things start to break loose in the world, and I'm only saying that I believe that we have different combinations to different locks, and tonight you're going to hear of the path of the Immortals. You're going to hear some amazing research that's going on, and I had it was a blessing to be able to spend time with both Cris and Tom at Tom's studio last week, I guess, and we cut some episodes for Skywatch TV, but we had a wonderful time of sharing, and the excitement when you've got 3 guys looking into ancient stuff and being directed, I believe, by the living God to parallel research to bring about the truth. I think it's pretty exciting, so it's a kind of a fun thing for me. I told Tom, and he's made the same statement, that we've done so much talk radio, but it's really exciting when we get to go on with you, Doug, because we get to have a time of basically checking our notes in real time and seeing how God is leading. The purpose of all this tonight, though, ladies and gentlemen, is to give you the root, help you to understand the root of evil, the nature of the cover-up. I believe this is a time that God declared that there's nothing that's hidden that hasn't been revealed. Cris Putnam's been doing a great job to remind the church, those who have been bought with the blood of Jesus, that we were brought into the realm by a supernatural act of God's divine intervention. And the large expression of modern Christendom is totally powerless. Meanwhile, the truth has been controlled by very evil people who want to control the history of the past in order to determine the future, and the future their way. So what a great opportunity is to have be on this show with you guys tonight, Doug. And Tom, nice talking to you. Cris, nice talking to you. And tonight we're going to be talking on the path of the Immortals. And I guess the best thing to do, Tom, would be to start it out with your trip to Mount Graham Observatory in Arizona because it's kind of, if you will, a pivotal point to the research that you gentlemen did when you were talking about all the different events that were taking place in concurrence or in relationship to the Vatican and disclosure and everything else. So go ahead, Tom, kick it off.
Well, sure. Hey, and by the way, great to be on with all of you guys, Doug, Joe, Steve, Chris, my favorite people to hang out with and to do radio. It's just a blessing to get the opportunity to be able to be here. Yeah, I mean, Chris would tell you, too, that, you know, we just never did set out to write 3 books. And it's funny, when we wrote the first one, I said, okay, that's that. And then, we were compelled to write a second one, and we said, okay, good, that's that. And now we've been compelled to write a third one. And so I'm going to quit saying that's that, and we'll just let God take us wherever all of this is going. Another thing that the public out there doesn't know, Steve, you just came, you know, to our studio in Missouri. We filmed what turned out to be 4 very dynamic programs that will be playing on network television, Skywatch TV. But it was amazing going through your research, and me and you both kind of looking at each other, smiling, knowing that we never talk to each other. The public would think that we do. When they see the work that, like, Chris and I have done, and then they see the work that you've done with your new book, Little Creatures, and things like that, they would think that we're on the phone all the time sharing information because we're writing about similar themes. And that's just not true. We don't ever know what the other one is doing. So it's been a really kind of an amazing thing, preternatural, just to sit back and watch how God has put all of us kind of on a common path. And you mentioned time locks when the show came on. He's opening these doors, and he's providing information right at the right time. He's not giving it to us too soon or too late, right at the right time when it is relevant. And that's how, in writing that first book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope Is Here, which we're giving away with the new book, by the way, and we're also giving away the second one, Ex Vaticana, and a whole bunch of other stuff I can tell you about later. But when we wrote Petrus Romanus, and we predicted that Pope Benedict was going to step down 1 year in advance. You remember, we talked about that here on Hagmann and Hagmann before it ever happened, remember?
Oh, I do.
And then when the Pope did resign, right when we said that he was going to, the very month actually, as it turned out, you know, people around the world wanted us in media. But here's what happened. So we're out there talking about this prophecy of the Pope, and we took a critical review, especially Chris took a really critical review, a view, I should say, of the prophecy, whether or not it was, you know, inspired or not inspired or a fraud or whatever it was, trying to just be really honest about the whole prophecy. But when we were out there talking about it, people would call in, especially when it was talk shows where people could call in and ask questions, like Coast to Coast AM. And they were asking us, yeah, but what do you make of the Vatican being out there now talking about aliens? Why are the leading astronomers for the Vatican out there saying that they would baptize an alien and the alien is our brother? Where in the world are they suddenly coming from with all of that? And just so people know, it hasn't slowed down. In fact, it's ramped up. Brother Guy Consolmagno is now actually on an international tour, visiting universities all across the world and right now inside the United States. And the name of the presentation that he's giving is, "Would you baptize an alien?" So they continue to push forward with this question. People wanted to know what we thought about it. Chris and I spent time talking about it, and we decided that, you know, if we didn't want to come across as just a couple of evangelicals taking cheap shots at the Vatican's astronomers or being accused of taking them, you know, taking them out of, you know, the points that they were actually making out of context, that the only way we were going to be able to come up with an authoritative answer was we needed to go to the Catholic horse's mouth. We needed to go to Mount Graham. We needed to go to the top of that mountain where the Vatican has an advanced telescope and where they are part of the observatory research group that uses the 3 telescopes that are on the top of that mountain. And here's something that people need to know. We laugh about this as kind of tongue-in-cheek. But you don't just get in your car, drive to the top of Mount Graham, jump out and say, we're here to see the aliens. First of all, it's fenced off, and, signs on those fences in multiple languages talking about all the terrible things they're going to do to you if you try to climb over those fences to get to the top of Mount Graham. So long story short, people can read that whole story in the book Ex Vaticana. But we negotiated this through the Arizona State University, and we went to the top of Mount Graham, where we met with the Vatican's Jesuit astronomer who was on duty that day at the VAT. We spent part of the day visiting with him. They let us climb all over the telescope, look at anything we wanted to see. Then we went to the radioscope telescope, which is in between the VAT and the one that's further up the hill, where we ultimately wound up and spent most of the day, and that is the large binocular telescope, and that's the telescope in which resides the Lucifer device, which uses infrared and is reportedly monitoring something that is approaching the Earth. I think it's exactly what Malachi Martin had said years ago on Coast to Coast. They are watching something that is approaching the Earth, knowing that it's going to be of the utmost importance in coming years. And so we wind up on Mount Graham. So how did we get to the path of the Immortals? Well, we go to Mount Graham. We come down off Mount Graham, and we think we've got everything that we need. We finished up the book Ex Vaticana. We send that book to the typesetter, and then as it's at the typesetter getting ready to be printed, I get contacted by a member of the Apache Nation who probably heard me on Hagmann and Hagmann, because he said, I heard you on the radio, and yours was one of the first programs that we were doing. And he said, you were talking about the fact that we had joined the environmentalists in Arizona to sue the Vatican and NASA in federal court to try to keep them from building that observatory on the top of that mountain. And he said, you said that we did that because for us it's sacred ground like a graveyard, and he wanted to correct that. He wanted me to know that it was much bigger than that, Steve. He wanted me to know that they sued them to keep them off that mountain because Mount Graham is one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world to all indigenous Americans, and it is because in their worldview, it is a stargate. It is a portal. It is a sacred mountainous location through which entities have entered into and exited from this world since the dawn of time. And I got to tell you, brother, when I found that out, talk about the conspiracy meter in my head going into the red zone, to sit back, I remember it just like knocked me over with a feather. I sit back and I said, oh my gosh, we may have completely missed why the Vatican and NASA were willing to fight in federal court. Well, why not just go to another mountain, right? Why not just go to some other mountain and get the same elevation, the same environmental situations? Why fight through federal court, literally get in the back pocket probably of the Arizona governor who had to do an end run around environmental law and basically declare by fiat that they were going to allow the Vatican to go up there and build that observatory. I mean, it was actually unprecedented. It was extraordinary. So far as I know, they've never been able to do that because, the environmentalist lobby is very, very powerful. And so it was uncanny. Why did they want up there so bad? And the Apache wanted me to know this is exactly why they want up there, because they know that mountain is a stargate. So that was extraordinary. It was almost like a scene out of a Star Trek movie. And we had to back up and say, wait a minute. Now, we've done shows and we've done programs where we've talked about prophecy and Isaiah saying that gates are going to open. But now the picture just got a whole lot bigger, because the implication here is that it wasn't just the Middle East, that all around the world there are locations that are doorways, that are portals, that are openings, whatever language you want to put on that. It's a place where things can and have in the past and allegedly are going to in the future come through onto the surface of the earth. And so we really had to back up, Steve, and I don't want to dominate the program, and I definitely want to hear Chris talk because he has contributed significant amount of the scholarly work and information, and he and I both went on research trips with film crews where he actually caught things on film. But I just wanted to kind of lay that down as a foundation so people would know how we got to this most recent research on the path of the Immortals. It was really a moment in time when it dawned on us that the picture was much bigger than anything we had anticipated in Petrus Romanus or in Exo Vaticana, and actually much more dynamic. I mean, the very idea that the Earth is a holding tank and that there are doorways and that there are things waiting behind those doorways is an extraordinary, if not frightening, thought.
Well, I think, Tom, one of the most important things, I'm going to get Chris's take on this, too. I think, Chris, I'm going to turn it right over to you right now because the church is the professing world of, let's say, evangelic Christians is totally unaware and totally not capable at this point of dealing with the implications of what's coming upon the earth, the gates of hell opening. So what's your take on this at this point? Because, again, you get a lot of flack. It seems like we could be the three Flack brothers, and the point being is that we're ducking we're ducking incoming. But the point is that as the denial and the ignorance go hand in hand, Siamese twins of self-destruction. The point being is that the evil ones are in their world of total supernaturalism. So, as you're doing this, Chris, as you're co-researching with Tom, as you're a student of the Scripture and the original languages, give us your take, because again, whether people want to deny it or not, when this thing opens and when it hits, they're not going to be able to basically run to the average pulpit personality because he's not going to have any answers. Go ahead, Chris. Hello, Chris. Did we lose him?
Hello. Hey, I'm here.
There we go.
You hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you. Did you just hear what I said? Hey, Doug?
It says he's on. And
yeah, Steve. It appears that Chris is. Chris, are you there? All right.
Well, look, I'm not. Are you there yet, Chris?
Hello?
There you go.
You hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Oh. Hey, Doug, Joe, Steve, and Tom. It's great to be on. Does everybody hear me?
Well, yeah. You must not have heard the introduction. Why don't you?
I did. I heard you.
Okay. So then, will you answer for the air? I don't know if we're cutting out because there's a whatever. The church, the evangelical world is not prepared to deal with the supernatural evil that Jesus warned us about when the gates of hell would open. So as someone who's writing about the supernatural and how it's happening, as you've been researching with Tom, I'm just reiterating, and basically traveling around, what is your take at this point? And Tom just laid it out, that the gates of hell are opening, that the portals, stargates, the dimensional doorways are all active throughout the world, or coming active. So your take.
Absolutely. It seems like as the world out there, the secular, non-believing world, so-called, is awakening to the reality of these things, and we see, competing shows about supernatural things, ghost hunting, UFOs, all over the television. So the secular world's waking up. A lot of the church has been lured kind of into a sleep where they're not paying attention and sort of just brushing all these things aside. And that's the thing we're trying to do, is wake up the church to see that these things are really happening, and that the increase in the interest in the supernatural and all the recent events that we're seeing reported are indicative that the hour is late and time is short. This time that people have been expecting for the last 2,000 years is coming upon us quicker than many might think.
Well, and I think that, Tom, as just to bring you up to date, I was in the TV studio today with Tim and Alberino, who got back from Peru and Bolivia, and Vinny, our cameraman. We were doing some editing, which should be up, Lord willing, at least a 3 or 4 minute trailer that is so exciting. But what's the fascinating thing, Tom, Chris, Doug, and Joe, is that when they were in Bolivia at some of the most well-known sites of ancient portals, now they are encountering armed guards, roped off areas, and monuments, if you will, megaliths being moved from one location to another to hide the difference between pre-flood architecture, let's just call it the architecture of the giants, and post-flood architecture. And what's really fascinating is when Bolivia's armament around the what they call their sacred sites, it's ticked up beyond anything even the locals who provide tourist places to eat and sleep, like hotels and stuff, they're amazed at the activity that's going on. So it seems like the governments of the world are getting really agitated, and it seems like whether it's Native Americans talking about their portals opening, or the South Americans, or the Asians, or the Romanians, wherever you're going now, people who live in areas that were designated as energy, if you will, call them vortexes, call them doors, call them whatever, the thing that's happening is that they're like a bunch of different lights turning on across the globe, and what's going to come through those is not going to be nice. Tom, do you want to direct your thoughts to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, by the way, I was on earlier today with our mutual friend Sheila Zielinski, and she was telling me that she had just concluded a fascinating program that she did with Timothy Alberino. And as I understand it, you guys also did something on Hagmann Hagmann, I think. And so I'm a little bit jealous. I want to get Timothy in our studio at Skywatch Television so we can do some programs on that, but I'll wait until you give me the cue for the perfect time. A couple of things, that I would say. One, you said that, the church is unaware of what is coming, and I think you're being nice. The church is
kinder and gentler Steve.
That's the kinder and gentler Steve coming through there. Look, I think, and I've been saying this over and over on television, I think this whole idea of the earth being dynamic, being the receptacle of intelligent and powerful beings that are inside of it. People drive to Walmart in their car, and they're not even thinking about the fact they're driving over a shell that, according to the earth, holds very powerful beings that are beneath it, but also the fact that this is a part of end times biblical prophecy. And I think it's the most overlooked aspect. Look, if you listen to all of the prophecy shows right now, the stuff they're talking about is real and it is important. We're talking about, the Islamic nation. We're talking about Israel being a cauldron. We're talking about the growing persecution of Christians around the world. We're talking about the fact that there are those that want to build the third temple, that the red heifer's been found, and so on. So all of that is really important. But how many leaders in prophecy circles do you have out there right now that are saying, and one other thing, folks, the Bible says that the gates of the earth are getting ready to open, and out of it are going to flood upon the surface of the earth very terrible things. You better know who you are in God. So there's a scary side of this, and then there's a blessed side of it, because when you read about this star that comes down from heaven, he's got a key to the bottomless pit. He comes down to the earth. He opens up this doorway, and up out of the earth come forth these horrendous locusts that begin torturing and tormenting humanity, and yet God instructs those beings not to touch those who have the seal of God on their forehead. So if you know who you are in God, then obviously it still might be kind of unnerving to see it happening, but you know that he's going to take care of you. If you don't know who you are in God, you need to listen up, because this is a very dynamic aspect of end times prophecy. The second thing, and I can already hear it happening, there are going to be those that are out there that, put themselves forward as leaders in Christianity, and they're going to say, well, there goes Tom Horn and Steve Quayle and the Hagmanns and Cris Putnam again, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to it. It's never going to happen. It's not even biblical. They're using resources to talk. But the Native American Indians, who cares what the Native American Indians believe? But the point that we make in the book On the Path of the Immortals, it's probably the best study on this that's ever been published, is that this is also a very biblical concept, that locations on the earth, and often related to mountainous locations, are doorways. You could literally go down the list and talk about Moses having to go up to the top of Sinai there to meet with God. Jesus, when he comes back, it says his feet will touch the top of the Mount of Olives, and then from thence he will descend down to the earth. You could talk about the book of Enoch, which is still in some Orthodox versions of the Bible, is quoted in the New Testament by more than one disciple and was read by all of the disciples, and furthermore was read and quoted by all of the early church fathers. But be that what it is, you can take the book of Enoch, and it talks about 200 powerful angels. What does it say? They come down onto the top of Mount Hermon, and that's the gateway through which they come through Hermon down to the Valley of the Plains, and there they begin their illegal activity of manipulating the genetics of animals and humans. Right there, by the way, at the base of Mount Hermon in Caesarea Philippi is where the Greeks years later built magical gateways, doorways into the side of the mountain, and they built alcoves there that were like dedicatories to the horned demon god Pan. But that's where Jesus is standing years later when he says, "The gates of hell will not prevail against my church." And then he goes on to talk about as Jonah was in the belly of the earth. But read the story of Jonah. How did he get into the belly of the earth? It says he got swallowed by a fish. He was taken down to the bottom of the ocean, and it says he arrived at an underwater city, which in the Hebrew is called Baravak, and it is translated a city of gates. And he goes through a gate in the bottom of the sea, and where does he wind up? In Sheol, Hades. And there's no doubt about where he was, because he says the Lord delivered him out of the belly of hell, Sheol, Hades. And then Jesus says, as Jonah was in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall also be the Son of Man. And then in the death, burial, and resurrection, he goes down into the earth, and guess what? When he comes up out of the earth, he has keys in his hand. So now we know that not only are there gateways, there's also keys. And in this case, he had the keys to the gates of death, hell, and the grave. And this story goes on and on. We talk about a bunch of this, by the way, in the book On the Path of the Immortals. Look at number 16. What happens to Korah and his family when they challenge Moses and Aaron and the priesthood, and the gate of the earth, the mouth of the earth, literally opens up and swallows them, and it says it took them down alive, down inside of Sheol, Hades. Genesis 28 and Jacob's ladder. He doesn't say this is the house of God. He says there is a gate here to the house of God. Genesis 10:8, Cush begets Nimrod. He begins to be, which sometime tonight we can also talk about, because Nimrod is an example of how sometimes the portal is actually a person. They begin to become something that allows something to come through them into this reality. But then the very next chapter, he builds the Tower of Babel. And once again, the Sumerians call this Adamananki, the gate to God. And Chris did word studies on this from the Hebrew and showed that in the Hebrew Old Testament, it also means, literally, the gate to God, the gate to the house of God. So I don't want to just go on, but the point is, this is a very biblical concept. And then, of course, the prophetic side of it, to continue in Scripture in the New Testament, what happens? Right there where ISIS is right now. Everybody's talking about an Islamic Antichrist, and that book is really popular right now, and good for Joel Rosenberg for bringing the ideas around that to the public mind, so a lot of people can kind of know where the Islamic nation is coming from. But what nobody is talking about is right where their territory is right now is the Euphrates River area. And what does the book of Revelation say? Revelation 9, when all this stuff starts hitting the fan, it says powerful angels come up out of the Euphrates River. They're behind these mystical doorways, gateways. The Islamic people say, the Sunni and the Shia, the Shia believe that the Mahdi is already here, and he's hiding behind a mystical gateway in that region, and that when the time is right, the gate's going to open, and he's going to come up out of the earth once again. Revelation, the doors of the earth are open, and very dynamic things start happening. So again, I'm dominating the conversation. I'm sorry, I kind of get excited. But so the 2 points I would say is, one, it's the most overlooked aspect of end times prophecy, and secondly, it's very biblical. So we ought to be talking about it.
Well, and a lot of the critics, I just saw a new one that was taking me on over taking the gates of hell out of context in Matthew 24 as in the days of Noah. When you just do a word study on gates, hell, the grave, Jesus descended before he ascended. When he says he gives us the keys to the kingdom, I think that most people see. Here's the thing, Tom, and you know this, Doug and Joe and Chris, that I've tried to reiterate so many times over 25 years. Jesus' words are so multidimensional and so succinctly simple, yet so wonderfully complex. That's not an oxymoron. Yet we don't believe the words of Jesus. See, here's the bottom line. I love what the followers of Jesus were in the beginning. They were called the followers of Jesus, followers of his way, before they were called Christians at Antioch, right, Chris?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's right.
So now let's talk about the word study you've done on gates, because I'll tell you this: if now I got to be kinder and gentler tonight. If someone who has no clue of original language challenges somebody like you that has studies it for so long, and it is what it is, just as Tom brought up, tell us about the gates, because the point being is that you got 90% of the people out there that don't believe we know what we're talking about, and they're soon to be consumed and destroyed unless the grace of God covers them. Go ahead, Chris. What about the gates?
Well, sure. Well, thanks a lot, Steve. Throughout the Bible, you see all kinds of language about the gates of heaven and things of that nature. The gate is it's a really strong symbol in biblical languages, like the gates of the city, things like that nature. But then you have really gates that sound like things like what we're talking about. We're talking about things like wormholes and interdimensional type of travel. Jacob's dream. Some people would call it Jacob's ladder or Jacob's staircase. He sees angels ascending and descending, and many people think that these were the divine council, the representative of the angels who were over the other nations as Jacob was traveling. There's all kinds of different interpretations within Judaism, but this idea of a portal, of this ladder between heaven and earth, between dimensions, is absolutely a biblical idea. And it's also, what was going on when Nimrod was attempting to build the Tower of Babel. And we have an extensive discussion of the Tower of Babel in our book that with some unprecedented information that many of the readers are probably not even familiar with. I know in my research, I was surprised to discover that King Nebuchadnezzar actually tried to rebuild the Tower of Babel before God struck him and cursed him, and he was like an animal. And many people think that Daniel took care of him during that time. But I actually found that the archaeologists uncovered this stele where Nebuchadnezzar was boasting about rebuilding the Tower of Babel, and that was his ambition, that he was going to do it. But another thing, the thing that we discovered is we don't really believe that tower, was something that was going to be high enough in that its altitude would actually allow people to contact the heavens, because we have buildings that reach as high as into the sky today that would probably make that pale in comparison. So that really wasn't the ambition. It was a portal. It was to make something that was like a gate that would reach into the heavenly realms, and God absolutely did not want to allow it. Now today, we see multiple types of technology competing to do this sort of thing, and I know that we've talked extensively about what's going on out at CERN and places like that, and we believe that there really could be an effort to undo the Tower of Babel, and I think we're seeing that, just in culture at large, in that everyone's becoming as one increasingly. Everyone speaks the same language, and we're all connected on the internet. It's really hard to say that what God cursed at Babel has largely been undone, and I think that also points to the lateness of the hour. And how much further will God allow it to go before He intervenes? I just can't see going much further. We have all kinds of bizarre genetic experiments going on. The Chinese are openly boasting now about their abilities to edit the embryo. So pretty soon we're going to have designer children coming along the line if the Lord tarries. I suspect He won't tarry much longer with just the level of the violation of His created order that we're seeing. It's just getting to the point where His offense his it's just so offensive and blasphemous to God what we're doing to creation that it's hard to imagine it going much further, Steve. It really is.
And
hey Tom. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. And then after you finish what you're going to say next, I want to come back and immediately deal with what you were told by the gentleman you interviewed down there on film, basically about the giants and stuff, because this is critical. The gates are related to the fallen angels, but also their progeny, and their progeny were trying to get away from the judgment that the book of Enoch declares was going to come upon the earth. So go ahead, finish what you're saying, and then I want you to jump right into that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just going to kind of follow up with something that Chris was saying, was that in addition to the fact that the concept of gates of the earth, that the fact that is a biblical narrative, and also that the earth is a holding tank. That's talked about a lot in the Scriptures. There's all kinds of stuff in the Scripture we can go into if you want that describe these dynamic realities inside the surface of the earth, and also even some additional scientific discoveries that have been made. But there is also a supernatural, an esoteric, or a demonic side of this, and this was one of the other things that we were told. In fact, I was contacted by a man whose mother is a member of the Apache tribe, and she actually lives at the base of Mount Graham, and she has had fixed cameras on the mountain. She's been doing this for years. She has they've sent me boxfuls of video, and I've had Joe slowly going through all of these video, and there were a few whoa moments where Joe got a hold of me and he said, Dad, he said, there is some really scary stuff in some of this film. He said that this mountain seems to sometimes just come alive. It's like sprites. It's like spirits that are coming in and out of the mountain itself. And then some of this stuff is spooky. It's got faces. It looks like alien grays. Very scary stuff. Well, anyway, I don't yet have permission to make that stuff public. Joe's watched parts of it. I've watched parts of it. But my point about it was this, is that the people that live in these areas where there are reportedly, here in the United States, where there are reportedly gateways that also opened at the same time they were opening in the Middle East. And that'll kind of go to the question you just asked me, Steve, in a moment about what we learned from Dr. Mosey, the third-generation medicine man for the Navajo Nation. But what we were learning is that activity in these areas seems to be increasing kind of dramatically right now. And so that was part of the reason why we sent Chris, took a film crew, and he went to the Sedona area, and, just to get B-roll and to go down there and talk to the people that live in the area that believe that there are portals and gateways. And a huge part of our book wound up being written about the Sedona area, which is kind of the southern end, if you will, of the Anasazi Trail, which is very central to the research that we were doing in the book. But I'll let him tell the story, because when he went down there with a film crew, he didn't just get B-roll; he got more than that.
Well, Chris, do you want to talk about what you got when you went down there? Because again, I mean, you posted some of it on YouTube, but what's happening? This is what I think is critical. You guys are in Arizona. Timothy Alvarino and the crew is over in Sardinia. They come back, for about a month. Then they head down to Peru. All of this stuff is going on. And again, Tom, I hope people understand this, because I think this shows the most amazing symphony of God's direction that I've ever personally experienced. There is no need for us to call each other, because we just obey the Lord. And critics can go basically to Sheol and have some fun. The bottom line is that they don't get what's going on, because I find that most of all they're afraid of this stuff. So, Chris, go into the detail of what you found, because you were in Sedona, and Sedona is considered a vortex, or places on this earth that are known to be areas of, if you will, dimensional transition or transmission points.
Absolutely. Steve, if you get on the Internet and you start looking for, things like interdimensional gateways, vortex areas, Sedona just pops up over and over and over again. So it just seemed like a natural starting place to go right where everyone's saying that they're experiencing this stuff. And a lot of it's New Age kind of material, and I had to sift through a lot of demonic nonsense, really, to to sift through to where I could find something that was worth looking at. But one of the places that kept popping up over and over again was an area known as the Bradshaw Ranch. And it's getting to be, the kind of place that it's just like the same reputation as the Skinwalker Ranch and places like that. These areas are getting to be well known, and there's several of them, and they're listed in our book as well. But this one, I kept finding it in the UFO sources I would look at and things like that, where just articles mentioning this ranch. And so we went out there to a high point in the desert that kind of overlooks that ranch area, and I set up some professional cameras. I took a professional cameraman with me, and my wife went, and we all went out there. We had a guide, driving the Jeep and all this stuff, and we caught some stuff that I really didn't expect to see. I'd never really been a believer in this thing they call the orb phenomenon, these balls of light that people catch on camera. A lot of times, dust particles and things of that nature will appear that way, and that's a very real camera phenomenon. Things that cameras have inner reflections sometimes. Cheaply made cameras have reflections inside of them that'll create the same sort of light phenomenon. But we took really high-quality Canons and, had them on stands and at least on a monopole or something like that, so we could get, good quality photography. And we had a video camera going at the same time we were doing the still photographs to try to catch these orb things. Well, if you get it on two cameras at the same time, it's not going to be a dust particle lodged on one camera or something of that nature, or some kind of reflection, inherent to the design of the camera itself. And not only did we get that, we got them on video. My photographer saw an orb with the naked eye without even using a camera at all. So it definitely isn't merely a camera phenomenon. And, we got a bunch of those things. And we got one moving in a really fast motion, and it seems to change direction in an evasive way and go the other way, and then just kind of dematerializes and vanishes. I don't really know what to make of that. It's the first time I've ever seen anything like that on video. So, that is actually up on Facebook at the Path of the Immortals Facebook page. If people will just go there and like that, they can watch that video of the moving orb. And, one of the things that people talk about in Sedona as well is there's all kinds of UFO lore about the military having an underground base in the desert there, and I didn't verify for sure if that's the case, but there's enough talk about it that I think something is going on. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of the things that you have said, Steve, because people have said that there are guys with weird uniforms, like United Nations uniforms and things like that coming out of there that they haven't seen before. And there's something even going on with some people believe that aliens are actually in contact with this government base. And so there are plenty of books where people are claiming that aliens are interacting with the government and this base out in Sedona. Now, I didn't get any firsthand knowledge of any of that, but I had read about it before I went there. And we weren't expecting this, but I was out taking a photograph with my photographer one night, and my wife was just out shooting shots, seeing if she could see orbs or anything like that in the photographs. And we captured a massive V-shaped UFO way up in the distance in the sky by accident. We didn't even see this thing until we got home and were viewing our photographs, and there it was, way in the distance in the sky. But that's on the internet as well, and I don't know what that is. I've had 3 different experts that examine it, and I've got a range of opinions. Some, like Richard Shaw, who does Marzulli's stuff, thinks that it could be like a bunch of different craft flying in a V formation. But other people,
hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt you. Those things are being seen by too many people. If TR3 as in Tango Romeo 3, R as in Romeo Bravo. The amount of information. I'm just correcting because I don't care what so and so thinks, and I don't mean to sound arrogant, but the TR3 and the TR4. Those are some of our most sophisticated stuff. The reason that people see the triangle and all of a sudden they see a ball, and then that thing, the triangle morphs into a ball, a giant orb, and then it disappears. Right. Well, the bottom line is we have the technology and have had the technology to jump space. So, it's not a bunch of things. Now, personally, there's so much stuff on the internet that you can see, but it's fascinating that when you're dealing with the triangular shape, and the government does have a secret base there. I sent to Tom, you remember this, I believe you have it, Native American Sacred Sites and the Department of the Defense. Do you remember when I sent that to you?
Yeah, well, you reminded me of it, yeah, and I haven't read it yet.
Okay, well, it's massive, but the gist of it is, and this will play, where you're describing, Chris, that you and your wife and your cameraman were, you're in the heart of this whole area. And what was fascinating, and I'm not trying to take away from you, I'm just trying to say what speculation is. My source for that information is 4-star active generals, plural, in special ops, and also some of the scientists that worked on it, okay? So, I mean, I'm talking about guys that were aeronautical engineers, and a couple of them have passed now. Thank God they were Christians. But the point being is that, you know, the speculation, take it away. But what's fascinating, and I will make this statement, almost every single military underground site, as well as above ground site, is always built or always contained by the military in order to, they'll put it as a testing ground, or they'll do anything. In essence, they don't want the public in these areas for the very reason that you and your wife and your cameraman saw these things, and people are seeing it all over. So anyway, I just wanted to straighten that out. Go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. You know, and it's really odd that the government bought this Bradshaw Ranch area. A lot of people might not know, but there's a famous Hollywood stuntman named Bob Bradshaw that had this ranch area, and they even had a western town that they used in a lot of the old western movies. So it actually has a rich history. It's in a lot of commercials, a lot of old movies. Even Elvis made a movie at this ranch. So it's a kind of a famous area. But then the government bought it out. Ostensibly, really for the Forest Service, so they were going to make it part of the public park system. That's what they said when they bought it. But guess what? It's still got chains around it and a fence saying "Do not enter," or you're going to be shot. So why is the Forestry Service acquiring land in the Arizona desert and then closing it off to the public, where you're not supposed to go on there anymore? And then at the same time, the UFO community and everybody else is talking about that there's an interdimensional portal there, and that all kinds of entities are coming through. And people are seeing all kinds of entities there in Sedona, Arizona coming through. Even some people have even reported seeing dinosaurs. Now, I don't really know what to make of that story, but that is one of the stories that's come through that very area where we were. Now, I didn't see anything like that, but we did catch a lot of those orbs, and we caught a huge UFO on camera. So that's just verified to me because I have it on film. And it will be available through Skywatch TV, and the photographs are absolutely published in the book as well.
Well, Tom, go ahead now if you would, because, again, time goes so fast, you guys, when we're on the radio together. So I want to the reason I want to get into this immediately is because for years, modern anthropology, modern archaeology denied that cannibalism existed in the Southwest. Obviously, they found out differently, but as you were being, how should I say this, informed by the third generation gentleman, what's his last name?
Mose, M-O-S-E.
Yeah. Okay, Mose, I mean, it was paralleling the same stuff that was out there. What I'm saying is, it's like two railroad tracks going into the horizon, where the horizon becomes, just at a vanishing point. But now, on the horizon, and then as you get closer to the horizon, when you see a fixed object, that object's coming to focus. You're on the, one side or the other. You're on the right track. I'm on the left track. We're both on the railroad track. Chris is the tie between the tracks. So what we're doing is we're headed into what used to be the unknown. But what's fascinating to me, and this is critical, there is, and I got into it with a gentleman on my email, there is no antiquity that records giants that were not cannibals that I have found. The only exception was one that was in the British Isles that was supposedly a friendly giant, and that's more in a Limerick realm than it is in the real realm. So the point being is that, will you take us to what Dr. Mose said?
Yeah.
Because I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely, because the history of what happened here in the United States of America, from the area where Chris went, the whole Sedona area, to Mount Graham, central to the Apache, the Hopi, the Navajo, all the way up to the ancient Anasazi. The story is that these guys came and they were absolutely cannibalistic. So if you go down where Chris was, he went to Mount Graham again, then he went over to Sedona. He was covering that whole side of the U.S. while I was up in the Four Corners area, and you look at what is the history, what is the story that is told there from the Apache. So Mount Graham, it's one of the four holiest mountains. So what happens? Well, in the time before time, they say that a large silvery disc came down over the top of the mountain. Now, ufologists like to jump on that and say, it's an ancient astronaut theory, dream come true, we were created by aliens. But actually, and we're not going to get into this tonight, but when you study the scripture, what they call the Oraphim and whatever, and you look at Ezekiel's wheel in the middle of the wheel, God actually moves about on both clouds and also in the chariot is carried about by the Oraphim. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Cris Putnam can correct me, but the point is these are angels that appear in kind of a circular fashion, and God rides upon the angelic machinery is a bad word, but you know what I'm saying. He rides upon the device, the chariot.
Well, the chariot. It's a chariot. You know, Tom, is a chariot.
So this this is what the Apache saw. They saw the same thing that Ezekiel saw. They saw this giant wheel that comes down over the top of the mountain. They say that in it is seated a bearded man. They respectfully call him the creator of everything that is good. They say he begins creating everything that is good upon the earth. Then, not long after that, the portal opens again over the top of the mountain. They say another man comes through. Now get this. They say he's not really a man. He is reptilian. He is serpentine. He's exactly what Cris Putnam does a marvelous job in the book On the Path of the Immortals, explaining the fiery flying seraphim who are part of these fallen watchers that came down to the earth, are also part of the army of Lucifer. So but Lucifer himself is described in reptilian terms. So this reptilian, according to the Apache and the Hopi and the Navajo, comes through this portal, and he begins deceiving all of the Native American peoples. He starts teaching them witchcraft, pharmakia. They go down into their kivas, and where at one time these were like their own little devotional church-like settings, he starts teaching them there how to use the sipapu, the Hopi call it. A doorway is installed in the bottom of their kiva to open a mystical doorway into the bowels of the earth itself, and they start practicing sorcery. And Dr. Mose tells us that they went on from practicing sorcery to practicing cannibalism. But guess what? They finally are successful. They open a door, and guess what happens? Giants come up through these doorways of the earth. They start sweeping across the Arizona Badlands. This is all part of the Apache creation story that you can even go to Wikipedia and read about it. They start sweeping across the Arizona Badlands. They're cannibalizing the Indians. They refer to those first early Indians as the Jindupids, which they say were just peaceful farmers that were living in the Arizona area. They're cannibalizing them. They're grabbing them and snatching them up like they're little chocolate bars or whatever, biting their heads off, throwing their bodies all about. And the early Indians, they run into the crevices of the mountains. They start crying out to that first god, that benevolent creator that they were aware of. They call him the sun god, and he sends a flood, a universal flood that covers over all the face of the earth, that wipes out all of the giants. And then, after that, they live in peace for a period of time, and then all of a sudden these giants start coming back. Now, they're not in the same number as they were once before, but they start coming back. Now, why is that important? Because the dating of that period of time in which the petroglyphs are being written down by the ancient Anasazi and the ancient Jindupids and Indians across America is exactly the same period in history here, at least 1,000 years or more before Jesus Christ walked on the earth in a body and flesh. They're over here talking about portals that opened, giants that came through. They're cannibalistic. They're wiping out everybody. They cry out to God. God sends a flood. That's happening over here, being written on stone in petroglyphs at exactly the same time that Moses is in the Middle East saying, and there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. And so what you have is a harmony, a historical correlation. on both sides of the world, exactly the same story is being told. These reptilian beings came through, and then giants came through, and then God wipes them out in a flood. The story is almost identical. I want to say something really quick, too, about what you were saying, Steve. I guess, are we getting ready to go to a break?
No, we got 5 minutes.
Okay. Something that you were saying that has to do with what Timothy was finding, because in these areas where these legends exist that tell these stories, these doorways open, it's those specific areas. It's not other areas. You don't find the Vatican or NASA or military presences going to places where the portals don't exist. It's like Chris was saying a moment ago. They're buying up this land. They're closing the public's access to be able to go into that land. They're literally covering up something that is in those areas, but it's in those areas where you're seeing these very strange and bizarre manifestations. You was talking about Timothy Alberino and the recent trip that he took to Peru and how he noticed that there was a vastly increased presence there of the military, of the government. Well, when you were talking a moment ago, I was sitting here making some notes. This reminds me of something I'll tell you about when we come back from the break that happened when I was on Coast to Coast AM questioning why we had gone into Iraq, Babylon, and something very interesting that transpired between the Iraq Babylonian Museum and a contact that was made to me.
Well, I think. Excuse me. I think the point that's going to grab everybody is that we're. How do I say this? We've been led to believe so many wrong things about history. For instance, you just talked about the lizard-like creatures, the serpentine creatures. Tim Alberino, ladies and gentlemen, you can go on my website, and you need to see this. This isn't a pitch. This is something that you can inform yourself. Did a marvelous analysis on how America got its name. It isn't America, and it was not named for Amerigo Vespucci, who basically just took that name. That wasn't even his birth name, but Amaruca, Ameruca, means land of the plumed serpent, land of the feathered serpent. So the point that's fascinating is what's in a name? Everything. And I think when we do come back from the break, we've got so much to cover. You know, basically, you guys, we have 6,000 years to cover in the next 2 hours, and then we've got the dateless past. And if we take one king by one, you know, of the Sumerian table of kings, Chris, I figure we got about 24 days of radio time just to get everybody up to speed on that. Doug, go ahead. I think, should we take our break or?
Absolutely. We'll take our break right now. Folks, today is May 5th, a Tuesday. You have Tom Horn, his website, skywatchtv.com. Cris Putnam, his websites are supernaturalworldview.com and logosapologia.org. And Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com. We're talking about the blockbuster new investigative work On the Path of the Immortals. We will be right back after, gentlemen, to hour number 2 on this Tuesday, May 5th edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. We are joined by Tom Horn, Cris Putnam, and Steve Quayle. I want to direct you to Tom Horn's website, skywatchtv.com. There is a fantastic deal on books that is available right at the front of his page, of $200 value for just $39.95, 6 books plus an audiobook and 2 DVD films. You'll get On the Path to the Immortals, Exovanicata, Petrus Romanus, and What Dwells Beyond, and plus the 2 DVD sets, The Path of the Immortals Investigative Report and Secret Vatican Alien Connection. That's $39.95 for all that. So go to Skywatch TV and order that now.
And don't forget Steve Quayle, his new work, Little Creatures. Got to tell you, all of the gentlemen that we have tonight, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Cris Putnam, and we can add Timothy Alberino, of course, a frequent guest on the show. They don't really talk or share investigative findings, but isn't it neat? I mean, isn't it really great to see how all of these, everything is just kind of everything's coming together. I mean, this is fabulous. Now, Stephen, we're going to kick it back to you. You're doing. Thank you so much for moderating this roundtable discussion. Tom, before the break, was talking about Iraq, and that's all. You know what, Steve? This has always bothered me about going into Iraq. What was found? What happened? What did they do? I don't know if you want to lead off on that, Steve, but I'm just curious about that.
Well, sure, I will. I'll be glad to, because years ago, it was stated that the tomb of Gilgamesh had been found. And not only the tomb of Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh's remains had been found. Gilgamesh is the oldest epic in the world, half god, half man, and guess what? He goes into the depths of hell. I was told by a general, very active, very famous, I will not drop names. If people think that, I tell everybody, Tom, Chris, take it to the Lord in prayer. But the reason for the Iraqi war, the one that most people were, familiar with, obviously, and the Congress was told, that was superficial. The real story, and Tom, I'm going to give it right back to you, is what they were looking for. They were looking for a certain piece, if you will, the key, maybe one of the literal keys that would grant to them the technology of the ancients, and it was a fight behind the scenes between the special forces community of major countries to get a hold of some of these artifacts. Now, that sounds like something out of Hollywood, but remember this, Hollywood gets its cues from the intelligence community, and the reason they leak this information into the mainstream via science fiction is to pre-program you to the point where you dismiss it as just, quote, fiction, but then it's deep in your subconscious. When they're ready to release the truth, they trigger and I don't understand all of the mind control techniques, but consider it a reserve data drop of information that they bring forth at the appropriate time and know how to activate the belief section or the beliefs section of your brain. So, Tom, go ahead and share on Iraq, because I think that's fascinating. I was privy in the background, Doug, meaning in real time, to what was going on to that. That may sound mysterious, but I'm not trying to be baiting anybody, but I was. And the fact that the fight and the war was on for those artifacts and for DNA, and I think this is where it's going to get really fascinating. So go ahead, Tom, and take it to what you were going to say before we went to the break.
Yeah, and by the way, thank you, Joe and Doug, for mentioning the fact that we have that $200 worth of books, product stuff that we're giving away over at Skywatch Television. People can just go to skywatchtv.com. Why am I mentioning that? Because one of the things that we're giving away is the never before available. It's not available anywhere right now. It's the brand new 8-hour audio version of the book Ahriman Gate, which actually kind of plays off of what was going on in the Iraq War, and the fact, Steve, that they were indeed looking for the key. They had found the location, but they didn't have the key, and that's what they were looking for. And actually, that's what the book Ahriman Gate is really all about. Although it's a novel, and it goes, into the whole thing about the finding of intact DNA and a book of life code and the recreation of Nephilim and UFOs and all that stuff. It's a novel. But it was actually spurred by this idea of why were we going into Iraq? And so I'm glad you asked me to say this, Doug, because I actually had a real experience around this. And here's the thing: Steve's mentioning that they went there to find a key. They went there to find something related to portals, mystical doorways. So the idea that the United States had invaded Iraq to capture something that Saddam Hussein had uncovered during his reconstruction of ancient Babylon. People don't know the depth of the literally hundreds of millions of dollars that he was spending in excavation, what he was looking for, the fact that he intended to rebuild ancient Babylon. But the fact that he found things that the world is not aware of sounds too strange to be true. But so I was on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. This was right during the Gulf War. And so the big question on everybody's mind at that time was, why did the United States go in to Iraq? Why was George Bush so stubbornly resolved to take the United States into Iraq, ancient Babylon, even though Iraq had not been connected with any good intelligence to the events of September 11, 2001? And so I went on coast to coast. I'm talking about something else, but this question comes up, and something very strange happened. George asked me why I thought that the United States had gone into Iraq. And so I was making these various points. I was saying that some people believed that the invasion had something to do with creating a strategic placement of U.S. military resources against what the administration saw as a growing threat from Islamic radicals, which we can see in the Islamic nation today. Some people said, that that's why we went there. I said that other people believed that it was an effort to seize and maintain control of Iraq oil reserves, and of course the Bush family are heavily invested in oil, so that might have been a reason. I pointed out that there were those who believed that 911 was actually either a convenient or an orchestrated false flag. A lot of people out there were saying that would allow the Bush administration to extend like a global domination project presence. But so I was just throwing out all these various ideas, and I'm on here, and I'm late night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Then I suggest that there's another reason, more esoteric, and it had to do with biblical sites in Babylon, which had been uncovered during Saddam Hussein's reconstruction of the ancient city, and that he may have uncovered something that the U.S. administration wanted. They went there to capture it. And so we went on and we did our show. I finished the show with Nori. It's probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning my time, and I'm going to go to bed, but I'm sitting in my office, so I go to check my email before I go to bed, and here I have an email, and this person is saying that they are, now get this, they're saying they are the curator of the National Museum of Iraq, the Baghdad Museum that contains all these relics from the Babylonian Mesopotamian civilization, saying that they had been listening to the radio show, and they wanted to tell me something. So I opened the email. This person claims that my last idea, the fact that the U.S. had gone there to capture something that Saddam Hussein had uncovered in all of his excavation work, that was spot on. So here's the deal. The emailer, they give me a temporary password to the museum's digital back door because they want me to see what they're calling proof that what I had said was not, in fact, a conspiracy, that, in fact, it was true. So the first thing I do is I verify the email that it's actually from, the IraqMuseum.com, and it was. Then I go to make sure that the hidden back page is actually an extension. I actually went to Google or Yahoo, and I looked up the museum, went to it, and then used the extension to make sure that I wasn't, somebody wasn't pulling some kind of an elaborate trick on me. And I confirmed that in fact was true. And it pops up this little thing on the page. It wants me to enter in my temporary password and log in, which I do, which this person gave me. And I got to tell you, I could not believe. This page opens up, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of step-by-step images of the first day of the invasion of U.S. forces, the very first day of the Iraq invasion. Where do we go? We went directly to the museum, the Baghdad Museum. And these images, if somebody's got a camera, right, and they are just literally clicking pictures, or it was video and then they saved them as images. I'm low tech. I don't know how nothing works, but literally step-by-step images of the first day of invasion showing a large U.S. military personnel presence, the U.S. ambassador, and they are there at the museum. There's this woman that's got traditional head covering. And if anybody's listening to this program tonight and they work at the Baghdad Museum, you know what I'm saying is absolutely the truth, and you have the images, and you could make them available to the public now if you wanted to. This woman with this headdress, with this traditional head covering, she greets the U.S. presence and the U.S. ambassador, and she leads this delegation of soldiers. They're all carrying weapons, and they're all in their garb, and there's a lot of them. and there's a whole bunch of Iraqis that are just following them around because they don't know what's going on. And she takes them into the museum, but then she takes them to a back door in the museum where the public's not allowed to go. This door has a great big lock on it. She unlocks, and these armed soldiers and the ambassador follows her down a very steep stairway, and they go down underneath the Baghdad Museum. And there is a gigantic underground storage room down there, something like you might see in an Indiana Jones movie. And inside, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of large wooden crates. And they start opening these crates up, and they're pulling out stuff. And this person, whoever's taking pictures, picture, every second, another picture. If I could have put these on one of those Disney things and spun it, I could have watched it like a movie in real time. Man, they start pulling out superb gold and silver artifacts, stuff that the world assumedly has never seen, invaluable items that have been dug up by Saddam Hussein from the sands of ancient Babylon. We're talking gold and silver masks of kings, sacred jewelry, but also cuneiform tablets, unknown secrets, steles bearing mysterious inscriptions, images, papyrus, strange-looking objects like headdresses and vessels and swords and shields, all this stuff. And I sat there, it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I sat there, just mesmerized by this, going through image after image after image, but then I saw something. Suddenly, the pictures that I'm watching, they depict like a change in the observers' demeanors. The crowd suddenly, they're either excited or they're agitated. I can't quite tell, but they're like jaw dropped. So I wasn't sure what was going on, and it happens right as these soldiers begin opening several really large, bigger than coffin-sized crates, probably about 3 times as large as a full-size adult coffin. And these were back in the corners of that concealed room. And as they open them, they look inside, and they don't take anything out. They gesture for the ambassador, and the ambassador goes over, and he looks down inside in the boxes. And then and I don't know if he tells them to reseal them, but they don't take anything out. They reseal those without removing anything, and immediately the soldiers come down, like 4 soldiers, 2 on each corner of these big crates, and they start carrying these things back up that steep stairway to the transport helicopter that's outside, and then they depart the city of Baghdad with those containers containing whatever in the world it was they had. I'm sitting here, I was literally flabbergasted. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I realized at that moment that whatever else the U.S. military was doing in Iraq, Babylon, whatever else they were doing, the minute they arrived in the plains of Shinar, they went straight to a top-secret room beneath the Babylon Museum. The people at the Babylon Museum, if they're listening to this program, they know what I'm saying is absolutely the truth, where Saddam Hussein had hidden objects of evidently national interest that had been dug up from the ancient world. They removed those containers in which something the American government wanted, something from ancient Babylon, had been found. Now, what it was, I have no idea because they didn't take it out of the box. But I can tell you it took like 4 strong soldiers standing on all 4 corners of these crates to carry them up out of that steep staircase, put them on a U.S. military transport vehicle, and flew out of town with them, and they took several of them out of there. And what's amazing is they didn't act like they even cared about these irreplaceable golden masks and jewels of ancient kings and queens that would have been absolutely irreplaceable, absolutely without monetary value. I mean, these things would have been worth literally tens of millions of dollars or whatever they'd have been worth. They didn't care nothing about that. Whatever was in those boxes, they took them. So I go to bed. I have intentions of getting up the next morning and going through the rest of the images, which were probably not the ones that were all that important anyway, because I walked through all of the images I cared about. But when I woke up the next morning, my password was expired. The curator would not respond to any of my emails. But I got to tell you that I found out for myself that there was definitely something there. So what was it? Was it ancient portal technology? Did the U.S. move it to an undisclosed location? Yeah, they did that, whatever it was. But did they do that so that it would be in the hands of a future world leader? I just absolutely have no idea. And from that day forward,
well, hey, Tom. Yep, Tom, I might be able to fill in the blanks on that. And now, for the record, ladies and gentlemen, I did not hear Tom on Coast to Coast. I did not talk to him about this. This is the first time I've ever heard this. But during that time, again, I was in contact, and they contacted me because evidently something, and only they can tell you why, but the point being is that they got what they were looking for. And the general told me this. He said, Steve, we wanted two things, and we got it. We got it before anybody else got to it, okay? He told me, and these are the guys that operate beyond the regular military. They're beyond the NSA. They're beyond a lot of things, okay? But they wanted two things, Tom, and this is, you don't know, so I'll fill in the blank there. According to active duty, 4-star, the point is they got the DNA that they're looking for, but they also got the control mechanism and the power source to basically activate what most people have come to know as the Tower of Babel. God destroyed it, obviously, but the point is by confounding their language. But that which Saddam Hussein had was the primary reason that we went into Iraq. The ancient technology, and God bless all of you who are listening to this that have cosmic and magic clearance, the technology, the DNA. And when I say DNA, I'm not just talking about DNA of the entities that they can reconstitute, et cetera, I'm talking about the formulas that you've referred to so many times in quoting the passage in concerning Nimrod, that he began to become a Gibborim. So I can only tell you, Tom, according to the sources I had, and they contacted me, and again, I want to share something real quick, and I'll turn it right back. The people that contact me for one reason. They say that because I've been telling people the truth. That may not go well with my critics. When I can check out a certain general through different ways, or a couple generals, and people say, well, you can't possibly know those guys. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I do. And so even from in the military community, now I'm not bragging, but what I'm saying, look at tonight. I have never talked to you, Tom Horn, about this incident. You have never talked to me about this incident. Yet tonight we're putting, two and two together. And see, it's kind of like, I would say this, it's a binary binding of truth for a single purpose, a single focus. If they've got that, they've got the technology of the ancients. You know how the Pentagon refers to these guys? He calls them the gods of the Sumerians, okay? The gods. Little g's. So the point is that the fallen angel technology, the fallen angel power sources, this is what the illuminated ones, the globalists, if you will, seek to, number one, control the world with, but they actually believe they can make war against God. So knowing that, the point is that it puts the whole battle of Armageddon, it puts the whole battle in the heavenlies. The book of Revelation talks about the devil and his angels fighting against God and his angels, and they get kicked out of heaven. This is, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard Tom Horn lay out to you is another one of those seminal points, the seminal point in history, because there is no way we talked about this before the living God. There is no way I knew what he knew or saw what he saw, yet those things dovetail. So, Tom, I think that's fascinating. Let me give you another example. A guy named Brett, I sent this to you, Tom Horn. Brett, God bless you for listening. He sent me a book by Suetonius, and Chris, you're going to find this interesting. It's called The 12 Caesars. And it talked about Nero's craziness, and I'm quoting from page 236. I had never seen this in all the decades of research. He said this, Nero was eager, it is said, to get hold of a certain Egyptian, a sort of ogre who would eat raw flesh and practically anything else he was given. And Nero loved watching this ogre, a giant, flesh-eating giant, tear live men to pieces and then devour them. Kind of sounds like Tom Horn, Cris Putnam's trip to the Midwest, or to the desert Southwest, doesn't it?
Oh, I thought you was waiting on Chris to respond. Yeah. Again, I don't want to hog the show. I'd like to listen to Chris.
Right. Well, go ahead, Chris. I'm just saying that it's fascinating, this thing about Nero. Everybody knows Nero was insane. He was also demon-possessed. He was probably, classically in history, one of the most evil personages ever detailed or born on the planet. But, again, the fascinating thing is that we're on the air tonight. The book by Suetonius, 12 Caesars, page 236, and Caesar would get, and an ogre, by the way, an ogre isn't like Shrek. You know, that's just the whole Hollywoodification of trying to make something very evil more palatable, just like Gremlins. So I'll give it to you, Chris, on your thoughts on that.
Okay, just on the concept of the ogre and Nero in the desert, or I wasn't sure where you wanted me to go with that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I uncovered, you see a lot of criticism of these ideas that Tom and you guys and we're throwing out all together, especially about these beings, but they're absolutely biblical. When you look in these chapters in Isaiah that are about the day of the Lord and the sorts of things that are going to go on, in the original languages, it's not even controversial that it's talking about, if you look in the Septuagint version of the Bible, it very clearly says that giants are coming to execute my wrath. Now, I don't think that a Jew living 100 years before the birth of Jesus would have even thought that was controversial. They just kind of accepted that sort of thing. But it also talks about, satyrs or half goat, half human, hybrid beings that'll be dancing around, during the destruction of Babylon. But this is really very clearly pointing to the day of the Lord, to the end times, not an event that's ever happened before in history. So, no matter, how people want to interpret those passages, they cannot accuse us of being unbiblical by talking about them. They might not like the way that we tie them to current events. They might not like the way we take it quite literally, but it is very much biblical. And there's their interpretation is their interpretation. If they want to turn it into some sort of symbolic language that has no tangible meaning, that is something they can choose to do. But I take it very seriously, and I think people should be watching for these sorts of things. And I think that recent events support that they're actually happening, and it's foolish to ignore it. So that's really the perspective that we're putting out here. And so the fact that you're releasing a book about the gates of hell being opened and creatures coming over, I think it is a warning to the church. Your kids are out there joining ghost hunting societies and occult clubs, going and trying to bring up spirits using electronics, trying to capture their voices, using little machines and stuff on television to try to detect ghosts. This is what the children in America are doing right now, the stuff that the Bible warns against very specifically and says that, you put yourself under the influence of demons by doing this stuff. So the fact that we're talking about this stuff and warning people about it, we need to even say it louder, and I don't care about what the critics think. We really need to wake people up because this is happening. The paradigm is shifting. The world is changing. The occult is becoming more in your face. And the fact that, the atheism movement is dying because people are seeing all this spiritual movement. And it's time for the church to wake up and start addressing this stuff. And I'm just really honored to be, in a place with you and Tom where we can function in that role.
Absolutely. And hey, Steve, if I can, what Chris is talking about with, the kids are out there right now, and they're being lured into learning how to open their own gates. It's fun, right? Get some electronic equipment and go ghost hunting and open a doorway and communicate with spirits. And then you mentioning that Nero, did you say Nero? Anyway, has an ogre.
Yes, Nero. Yep.
And he's got this ogre, and he likes watching him be cannibalistic.
Tearing people literally live apart in front of him and then eating them, and that really caused, I guess, some perverted response in Nero, but that was his favorite thing. And again, you see, Tom, I didn't know Brett. Brett is one of our listeners, and God bless you, Brett. The bottom line is he sends me this, I think today, okay, when I forwarded it to you today, And the point being is it ties in exactly with what Dr. Mosey told you, did it not? I mean, will you share, because this is something that, I'm sorry, I'm excited now. Will you share what, I get really, this is like candy for me, ear candy. The point being is that again, I started the show with saying that classic archaeology, classic, historians just denied cannibalism in the desert Southwest, blah, blah, blah. And now you hear the story about literally men being torn apart, and you're hearing this from Native Americans. By the way, Native Americans know who tells the truth and who doesn't. Just look at the history of the United States government and the way they've treated them, I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm blunt. The point being is that this is will you share that, because I think here's what I'm trying to get people to understand. The thing is that we've already been prepared to be turned into a food source. Soylent Green, The Twilight Zone to Serve Man, the Outer Limits episodes, this thing is predictable in the genre of cinema. Chris is talking about kids. Look at the goths. Look at the vampirism, drinking blood. Look at the combination, of humans, not human, forgive me, perverted sexuality and its association with death. So the point being is that when you're in the desert Southwest and you're hearing this, and again, I'm going back even deeper into ancient history due to the Woods document that's in my new book, or the revision of Genesis 6, the second volume, which has got 165 new photos. I'm telling you that there's a reason. There's a reason. It's fascinating. Cris Putnam, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn are right back at the Tower of Babel, or Babel. Some people pronounce it one way, some pronounce it the other. But the point is that now there's nothing new under the sun, Cris Putnam. We're there, that which was is going to be again. So Tom, share the cannibalism thing. The reason I'm focusing on this is because it's critical, and it explains what happens to civilizations that embrace this. Literally, they're not good to the very last man. They devour each other to the very last man, who then ultimately.
Here's the thing. We go to Mount Graham, we come down off Mount Graham, we get this information from the Anasazi, we realize that there's something more here that we haven't thoroughly investigated. We're Americans, we grew up in this country, and all of a sudden our eyes are being opened to information about the ancient American history that we are unfamiliar with, and so we decide to investigate it. So while Chris is just returning from Sedona, Arizona, and capturing film of light beings that are coming out of a portal, essentially warning him not to come any closer, I think, and being buzzed by V-shaped craft, I'm getting in a rig, heading out with a film crew for the four corners of the United States. Now, we go into all of the details about that in the book, On the Path of the Immortals, so I won't take time to tell it all, but here's this one part you're asking me to tell you. We had tried to get authorities from within the Native American nations, whether it be Apache, Hopi, Navajo, whatever, to sit down with us. When we're talking elders, people who are leaders in the nations, and they're very suspicious. They don't like to talk to white people because, we too many times New Agers have taken their information and then went out and misused it. And so they're very suspicious. So we were working a year and a half, trying. Finally, bottom line is we get a sit down with the third generation, the Navajo Nation's medicine man. He's an academic. He's written books that they use in their universities and schools. And we meet him actually on the campus of the school. We go into a traditional hogan, and we didn't tell him we was going to film him. And when we get there, he's willing to meet with us. We go inside the hogan. Our cameraman comes in. He sees the camera. He doesn't like the camera, but he doesn't stop us. And so we actually filmed 3 hours of Dr. Don Mosey, he's a famous person in the Navajo Nation. And one of the books, I don't know if I showed it to you when you were here, but one of the books that he wrote, he had an artist depict some of the giants that were alive and that the Indians had to fight against cannibalistic giants here in the U.S. in early times. But anyway, we sat down, and here's the point I want to make. He starts telling us, because I asked him, tell me, what happened to the Anasazi? This is a giant mystery. Where did these pre-Pueblo Indians that built these magnificent cliff dwellings in the Four Corners area of the United States, where did they go? They disappeared literally overnight. Nobody knows where they went, and the universities admit that. Now they have theories, and they say that, you know, there could have been like a drought, and so they migrated away. And so I asked him to tell me what happened to the Anasazi. And so we sit down, and he starts giving me the traditional story that they might tell to, you know, any other white person about a 7-year drought. They migrated away. They eventually became a different people, maybe the Hopi, whatever. And so he's talking, and I stopped him. And I said, now, I understand there's really a lot of evidence that suggests that that's not what happened with the Anasazi, that something else happened. And we've got this on film. And, oh, by the way, we're giving away, it's not available to the public anywhere. If you go to skywatchtv.com, you'll see the big ad up there on the top of the page. Click on that. If you purchase the book On the Path of the Immortals through skywatchtv.com, among all the other $200 worth of stuff we're giving away, we are providing the 2.5-hour special investigative report that has exclusive film footage of Dr. Mose, things that Cris Putnam caught on film. That 2.5-hour investigative report is being provided free, but you can't get it anywhere else. That's where you're going to get it. But anyway, so I asked him, what happened to the Anasazi? He says, he starts telling the story, and when I question it, he stops. And this is the part, Steve, that got me. He looks right into the camera, and people will see this, and he says, and he smiles actually, and he says, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but, and I have no idea why this man went off record and told this story, but for the next hour, he tells us a different story. He says, if you would have asked my great-grandfather, who was also a Navajo Nation medicine man, here's the story that he would have told. And, brother, he starts describing a moment in early American history where a portal opens in the Four Corners area of the United States of America, and a reptilian, a deceiver, comes through the portal. Same story, almost identical to what the Apache talk about. And he starts deceiving the people. He starts teaching them sorcery, magical incantations. They go inside their kivas. They start practicing pharmakia. They open doorways. Giants come through and start cannibalizing, eating the people, teaching the people who are with them. They get like, here's the crazy part of this, Steve, they get like some of the Anasazi that are willing to be their guides, right, because they're trying to survive, to help them track down where other Anasazi are so they can eat them. They become cannibalistic. Now, here's something I want to tell you. This investigation continues right up until this very moment. I haven't stopped. Allie Anderson, who's a private investigator that works for me full-time, came on staff this last year, and I told her I want to know the deepest parts. I don't want to stop just because a book's written. I want to know the deepest parts of the storyline. She just yesterday gave me a 50-page report that is, it's just absolutely unbelievable. It is literally evidence at the university level here in the United States of Nephilim, probably human breeding, if you will, or raping Anasazi and the offspring. Now listen, this 50-page report is based on archaeological digs that universities here in the United States conducted under the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center of excavations in southwestern Colorado. Some of this information is actually available online. You could read it online. If you read it, here's what you'll find. You'll find out that they found, in their excavations, they found locations where the Anasazi were literally ripped to shreds. Now, I'm not talking about somebody got killed, beaten in the head with a hammer, and burned in a fire and ate. I mean literally the flesh and bone is ripped to shreds, as if they had been torn apart, Steve, like this ogre you was talking about a moment ago. This is in the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center excavation, southwestern Colorado, university-level excavations that were done here in the U.S. Secondly, they found where the bones of some of those who had been ripped to shreds were scattered over a very large region, as if something had torn them up, almost, it sounds terrible, almost like packing them for food, almost like carrying them, like they're you know, like the Indians would, you know, make jerky or something and carry that over long distances, because the bones of an individual would be found many, many miles away, another bone that relates to that individual. Thirdly, and this is where it gets really weird, they uncovered remains of what they're calling Anasazi Indians, but they're larger than all of the other Anasazi Indians. They have mutated mandibles. They have sharp teeth, almost like an animal, and they have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And immediately when I'm reading this report that again is done at the university level here in the U.S., having to do with excavations among the Anasazi, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this sounds so much like the Middle East. These women were literally raped by the Nephilim, if you will. They gave birth to Gibborim. This is the story it tells in the Middle East, but now we're talking about here in the United States. And these date to exactly the same period in time that the Old Testament Bible tells us this was happening over there. So,
hey, yeah, I could add just a detail to that. I mean, one of the reasons that we can be really confident that there was cannibalism going on is that archaeologists have absolutely discovered petrified human dung, human waste. But within that human waste, they found that there was human DNA, which pretty decisively shows that they were eating humans. So the story about the reptilian coming through the portal actually starts to take on more weight, considering the archaeological evidence actually supports it better than the story that they just kind of dispersed and became other tribes.
Absolutely. So bottom line is that's the 2.5-hour DVD that we're giving away with the book. That's what people are going to find out about. That we found evidence that was not just somebody's opinion. It's not just an old Indian somewhere that wants to tell us stories. These are academics. They're very well respected. Their works, their books are used inside the indigenous schools, Navajo, Hopi, and so on schools. And they're oral historians, so they pass this down orally. In fact, it's very interesting being in a Hogan and having a third-generation medicine man tell us these stories. And in fact, he told us that when the missionaries came to the United States, the first missionaries, the Mexican invaders and so on, came here and started telling the indigenous people their stories to try to convert them to Christianity. Many did convert to Christianity. But he said, our forefathers told him, we already know these stories. We already know that God created, that a reptilian fell, came to the earth, deceived mankind, giant cannibalistic beings came onto the surface of the earth, God wiped them out in a flood, and after the flood they came back, not in the same numbers as they were before. He said, we already know this to be true. We lived it. It happened here at the same time that it was happening in the Middle East. And so that was the extraordinary thing that we found. But, of course, now the question is, they came once. There's universal evidence that it did, in fact, happen. But now the question becomes, is it going to happen again? And that's the part that actually ties into biblical prophecy, end times prophecy. And that's what we try to do in this new investigation on the path of the Immortals. And Chris did some research in there that is absolutely some of my absolute favorite stuff I've read in a very, very long time, where he talks about the fiery flying seraphim. And I don't know that we'll talk about that tonight, but just so people will know, when they get the book and they talk, and You see the biblical evidence, the Hebrew evidence, even the Dead Sea Scrolls that also describe these creatures that came through as having a reptilian presence. The fact that that is corroborated in scholarly works is just wonderful. It's fabulous.
I think it's critical that people understand that, again, this is what I wish, forgive me, this is what I pray people will do, that they will learn to basically listen, take everything to the Lord in prayer. But when you, Tom, when you, Chris, when I or others are writing these books, and we spend the time to research the actual source material, I think that people have got to understand that this is a shaking of what you and I and we all have grown up thinking this is normal. The fascinating thing about Mesoamerica, the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs, everything that I have tracked in history basically goes back to the same thing, that the appetite for human flesh. Somebody said, where is that in the Bible? It was in Numbers 13, 33, 34 in that area, that the land, it devours its inhabitants. That means it doesn't basically hit them with taxation. It means that they ate them. And the thing that is interesting is that obviously the life is in the blood. I think it's fascinating. I believe, Chris, you'll I think really see this. I believe the fascination with vampirism is a preparatory mindset in the supernatural realm to basically get people accustomed to accepting the fact that when these things come forth, they're going to have to be fed. And Tom, do you guys remember the old Series V? I think they brought it out again. The Flying Saucer series. What were those entities looking like after they stripped their face masks off, or their whatever they could project the humans' look on? They were reptilians, were they not?
Absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is, here's the deal. The reason you have Area 51, you have all the different sites, all the Dulce bases, all the information about aliens, etc., is that they are seeking to come back into our realm. And maybe in the next hour we can get into we'll get into Hollow Earth, but I can tell you this, that I had, and this will probably whet some people's appetite, I had a general talk to me, and he said, if you want to see what we have to deal with in the Special Forces area of the things that go bump in the night, okay, he said, go watch the show, The Cave. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's some really, really nasty things in the cave. And he said, Steve, it's worse than that. So it's fascinating that in the cave, and again, it's available on whatever you can, get at Netflix or whatever. And there's another movie that was like that, and I forget the name of it, but it was very similar. They both came out at the same time. Again, that was floating. So when Jesus said that men's hearts are going to fail them for things coming up on, UPON, the earth, what do people think that is? Do they think it's seriously, if our critics have any basis of standing, why don't they do a refutation beyond the sons of Seth? And everything in Genesis, I want to make this clear, everything in Genesis said after its kind. Anything that God created and he saw it and it was good. Everything the devil has done in history, and people can go on my website, Genesis6Giants.com, Genesis 6 Giants, all spelled out. 6 is the numeral, the number 6. Genesis6Giants.com, and read in the ancient manuscripts. It's up on the top nav bar, but they can read the Book of Giants, the Book of Enoch. See, we talk primarily about human-like things, but it says the fallen angels, the Nephilim, had sex with everything. I mean, in my book, Genesis 6, I quote some of the Babylonian tablets where these guys, the Nephilim, are bragging to their buddy Nephilims about getting it on with animals. And that's why God's prohibition, listen to this, against bestiality required the death of the beast as well as the person that was doing the beast. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it any clearer than that. Most people cannot equate that to a genetic judgment by the living God. I don't know to the degree that was possible. But aren't we seeing this, you guys, in a technological form? Chris, I'll point the question to you. Are we not seeing the combination now of chimera-like beings, everything, and it kind of passed. It just went over everybody's heads until Tom Horn came on the scene, Steve Quayle came on the scene, and others came on the scene. Wait a minute, this is wrong. We're crossing every boundary. So every single boundary that God had placed in a position for our safety, for our protection, out of His love for us, these guys are trying to break. So it's fascinating that when somebody says they're seeing dinosaurs or they're seeing anything in that realm, I don't doubt it. And by the way, Tom, did you ever get that YouTube to open up with the demons at the beam point in CERN?
No, you sent it to me earlier and it didn't open, and I left, and then when I came back it was time for the show.
Okay. Well, anyway, I was contacted by a cutout, meaning somebody that was too frightened to contact me. I don't blame them. And they were talking about those very things seeing. So, Chris, this is the question to you. We've got CERN now. We have people literally dancing. I'm talking about a dance troupe, Let's call it the ballet from hell, okay? Hell's ballet, dancing around, doing the dance of cosmic destruction in CERN. Okay, ask yourself
Shiva.
this. Yes, Shiva. They're doing the dance of Shiva. I'm talking about people literally in the tunnels, dancing around, making this big epic thing. Obviously, they're celebrating the coming destruction of the world and the promise of a new recreated world. What's your thought on that? Because this is so beyond bizarre. This is so beyond the outer limits. This is even beyond the time tunnel combined with the Twilight Zone. Okay, the point being, address that because these are human beings dancing to their own destruction.
Yeah, well, Steve, it's beyond question that they have this huge collider built over there, and they have a statue of what every Christian would easily identify as a demon. The Hindus call their creator Shiva, and also the god of destruction, the destroyer of worlds. In fact, when CERN was going to go online, a young Indian girl actually committed suicide, thinking that Shiva was going to be entering through CERN as a portal. So a lot of people were concerned that actually take the god Shiva seriously. Now, of course, we would identify Shiva as just another demon. In Hinduism, they have literally 30 million named gods, and I think that's quite telling of what that religion is really about. I mean, the 30 million gods are basically just the different levels of demonic entities that we would acknowledge. Yes, they do exist, but they certainly aren't our creators, or ultimately they will not destroy the universe. They're going to be put in their place. But here we have these atheistic scientists who are making really high-minded and boastful claims about discovering the nature of creation. They're going to call, the subatomic particle the God particle, as if they were discovering God with subatomic physics. And it's all kind of blasphemous in a particular way, because most of them don't even really believe in God, much less worship Him or acknowledge His holiness, or that He really is the creator. They think that it's all naturalism, and that they are these scientists who are going to inform us of the truth, and we're just, superstitious religious people who can't grasp, their level of intellect. This is what they think. But at the same time, they're making statements about we could open a gateway and no telling what might come through. I mean, they believe in parallel universes. They believe in the possibility of other realities, and they speculate that, they could actually send a message to one of these places using gravitons. They believe that gravity might be responsible for what they call dark matter. Now, what's dark matter? Dark matter is like they detect something really heavy out in space. They know it's there. The mass is there. They detect the gravity of it, but they can't see it. So they call it dark matter. But one of the speculations that they have is that it's actually a parallel universe, and we can't see it because it exists in dimensions outside of our own. But gravity is able to traverse the distance between universes on its own. So we feel the effect of the gravity, but we can't actually see the matter itself. So they call this brain world theory, and it's actually taken on quite a bit of life up at Harvard and some of the universities, and it's actually a theory of parallel universes. Now, I think it's really interesting that these atheistic geniuses can believe in parallel universes, but they think that we're somehow superstitious for believing in heaven and hell. It's really not that far apart. And the sort of ideas that we're talking about in our book on the path of the Immortals, when we start talking about portals and all these things that a lot of people maybe have occult associations with, these are absolutely scientifically respectable ideas these days. And there's a new movie out called Interstellar, where they actually travel through a wormhole and go to another universe trying to save the people of the Earth because our environment's going to be destroyed. But they show in great detail how all that could work scientifically, and they show extra dimensions and how that might work. So these ideas are absolutely respectable in physics. But, when we start tying them to things like Bible prophecy and the end times, some people might accuse us of being fantastic. But, I think it explains some of the things that we see in Bible prophecy. You see at the judgments that these creatures come up through what? A door opens to the bottomless pit, and they're released. You see under the river Euphrates, that some kind of doorway is unleashed, is unlocked, and these fallen angels fly out to execute judgment. We see in the Septuagint version of Isaiah, chapter 13, that it says, "Open ye gates, ye rulers, giants are coming to fulfill my wrath." So these ideas, seem to mesh with these more scientific ideas. One of the things that I found even more fascinating is how, they think if there is a traversable wormhole, most people thought that a black hole would just decimate a human being because of the gravitational forces as you get close to it. But a physicist named Roy Kerr discovered that if a wormhole were rotating at enough speed, that it would create inertia that you could actually allow someone to traverse it. So they call that a Kerr black hole. Now, so what you're looking at would be very much like what we call a vortex or a whirlwind, something like that. Now, isn't it interesting that you can look at these Hebrew scriptures, even to the oldest book of the Bible? A lot of people think Job was the oldest book of the Bible. And isn't it interesting that when God speaks to Job, it says, out of a whirlwind he spoke, and it's like you see what this is very much sounds like an ancient person's description of what a traversable black hole would actually look like.
Well, and I think that as how we say this, theoretical physics has to ultimately come into the spiritual realm, because again, isn't it amazing? They will actually believe in aliens. They won't ask the question I always ask: who created the aliens? They don't want to deal with that. Well, they've always been. Well, how do you know they've always been? And if they've always been, they sure don't need to go on R&R and come to the planet Earth, the orb of perpetual pleasure and indulgence for, how should we say this, undersexed aliens. I'm sorry to put it so blunt, but that's for a good time. When you pass the rings of Saturn, you see a sign out there saying go to Earth and have a good time. The reason I'm saying that in a ridiculous manner is because that's how ridiculous the argument is that the aliens created us, but never asking the question who created them. Is it so tough for... Yeah, go ahead.
It doesn't really answer the question. You press them on the origin of life, because really the origin of life really demands God. It demands a supernatural creator outside of nature, to create nature. So, that is just an unanswerable question. And so you have these naturalists who don't have an answer. They push it out to another planet. That's all they've done, though. They haven't answered the question. They didn't even address it. They just took it off of Earth and said aliens seeded life on Earth. But they never answered the question, where did life come from? And, that's the problem with evolution and that whole worldview, is that it's incoherent because it's incomplete. And so that it's based on some kind of faith or promise that naturalism is true. So you start to ask yourself, is this worth putting my faith in? And, there's no reason to believe it. And it doesn't make sense. It can't get off the ground. It can't get started. It's almost self-defeating. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Absolutely. Now, again, here's the thing. Are we not commanded in the Scripture, Tom and Chris, to study to show ourselves approved unto God? where is this? Can I say this? Where is this dumb unto death, reckless abandonment of searching the Scriptures, and why does everyone want to spend so much time fighting us, who's opposed to what we're trying to present? I mean, one of the most famous television evangelist's wife, I'm told, I have not listened to it, spent a half hour berating us, by name, not you, Chris, but I think it was Tom and I. And the deal is that that's one you got left out on. The point being is that we're at a point now in history where we can give answers. The Word of God has answers, and I can tell you this: just the fact, and I know we got to take a break, just real quick, just the fact that when people understand that the children, the inhabitants of the land, when the children of Israel were commanded to kill every man, woman, and child, those were not normal human beings. And that had been a sticking point in so many people's lives, just that simple explanation, because God knew if they didn't get rid of them, those guys would eat the children of Israel. Do we need to take a break, Doug?
Yeah, we're going to take a break right now. This is a great stopping point.
Absolutely. You're listening to the Hagmann Hagmann Report on this Tuesday, May 5th, 2015. Our guest tonight, Mr. Tom Horn. Our third and final hour on this Tuesday, May 5th, 2015, On the Path of the Immortals, is Tom Horn and Cris Putnam's latest book. Go to their website, Tom Horn's website, skywatchtv.com, or Cris Putnam's website, supernaturalworldview.com, or logosapologia.org, and pick up that book, On the Path of the Immortals. This is our third and final hour. Steve, I'll turn it over to you. You've been doing a great job.
Well, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, again, this will be available, on Doug and Joe's website. And I would encourage you to prayerfully and carefully start to take advantage of the opportunity combined, with all the years that Tom Horn's been doing this, I've been doing this, Chris is doing this. The area of research that we're in, and the area, I would say this, of what I would call true revelation based on the Word of God. I mean, just as the enemy has come in like a flood with all of the false supernaturalism, all of the occult, all of the New Age, all of the, I would say, aberrations of the truth still shines out and will stand out. Chris, you were talking about dark matter. Today, the Hadron Collider collided its first photons. But let me share this because this will illustrate what you just said. I'm quoting. Other results may reveal the existence of hidden dimensions through which gravity spreads, explaining why the gravitational pull of the planet is weak enough to overcome just by jumping. It says this: physicists will be looking at an area known as new physics, which includes antimatter and dark matter. We're not able to see these, but they are thought to make up most of the universe. In contrast, visible matter only makes up 4% of the universe. So based on visible, that which is visible is 4%. There's 96% of the universe that we don't even see. And aren't we told in the Bible that the visible was created by the invisible? God said, "Let there be light." And that's the entire Scripture. When I say that, the scriptural manifestation is a God supernatural, above and beyond His creation, creating for an object of His love, that's mankind created in His image and likeness. Through sin, the likeness is gone, but it's reestablished through Jesus. Jesus becomes the second Adam. We get a blood transfusion on Calvary, and we become new creations in Christ Jesus. But now we've got to basically get by the grace of God and His anointing, only by His Spirit, well, people begin to understand that the reason that Christians are being trodden underfoot, that the salt's lost its savor, the light's gone out. Not only has the light gone out, but not even have they put it under a bushel, they've covered it with 5 tons of mud. The point is, still, God is going to have a people. So, Tom, at this point, we're into the third hour. Tell me where you see the Lord taking you. Chris, I'll ask you the same question after Tom gets done, and I'll share how the same thing in my life and why I see transitioning into this stuff. I believe God is getting ready, if you will, Tom, to basically reveal those secrets that have been sealed from the beginning of time. And as Daniel said, they're sealed up, Daniel, for the appointed time. This is the appointed time. So, Tom, take your liberty. Don't worry about it. If you take 10, 15 minutes, take it. Chris will take it, and we'll just go like that and pass it back. But go ahead, Tom, then Chris, and I'll chime in.
Yeah, well, once again, Steve and Doug and Joe, thanks for having me on the program this evening. It's great to be here with Chris. Here's the thing, we're talking about CERN and what's happening with the Hadron Collider, and people might wonder, okay, so what? What in the world does that have to do with the gateways of the Earth? But actually, it has everything in the world to do with the gateways of the Earth, because what they're doing at the CERN Hadron Collider, by their own admission, is they're trying to open a doorway to a parallel reality, to a parallel universe. They're trying to find the keys that will open the doorway. And at the fall of mankind, original man, there's diaphonetic marks connected in the Hebrew language, as I understand it, that imply that the original man could see as God sees. But after the fall, we just become Aman, man of red clay. We become something entirely different. The fall changed our perception of creation, and that's why we can only perceive 4% of reality. Our three-dimensional reality, or 4 if you add time. We don't perceive these other realities. 96% of what they're calling dark matter, and that's what they're trying to do. At CERN, they're trying to circumvent God. They're trying to circumvent the fall. They're trying to rebuild the Tower of Babel. They're trying to say, we will bring together all of the greatest minds and languages of all of the earth, and we will figure out what's going on here. We will figure out what the keys are to the doorway to the gods. There's an article at Forbes today. I think it's called How to Find a Parallel Universe, something like that. People can go and just look it up. And I was reading it earlier before we came on the program. Scientists there are discussing in somewhat very certain terms their faith that CERN is on the cusp now of discovering evidence for parallel worlds, parallel realities. And so they're running these experiments. These are, by the way, these are the most powerful experiments ever conducted on the face of the Earth. They are colliding protons, not right yet, but they are going to this coming week. 1 week from now, by the mid of May, they'll be colliding protons at nearly the speed of light, and they're expecting that they'll have something like 600 million collisions per second that they'll be conducting. Particle detectors, there's 4 of them that spread around that 17-mile Large Hadron Collider. They'll film the particles as they collide into one another. They get them going really fast, almost the speed of light, and then they narrow down magnetically the pathway that they're traveling to about the width of a human hair. So you have literally hundreds of millions of protons that are being accelerated almost the speed of light. They're going to collide them into one another. And then they're going to, when they collide into each other at those speeds, and this is speeds we've never done before. We've gone from 8 TeV, which is tera electron volts, to 13 TeV. This has never happened on the face of the Earth before. These colliders are going to literally explode apart beneath the surface of the Earth inside that collider, and then they have detectors that film what happens when those break apart into their subatomic particles. Now, what are they doing? They're looking for quarks. They're looking for gluon. Go back and get the series that Steve Quayle and I did. It's a 6 or 8 part series called The Days of Noah or something like that. And here's what's amazing, Steve. You and I did this something like 7 or 8 years ago when the CERN collider was going online for the first time, and we said they're looking for gluon, they're looking for quarks, they're looking for gravitons. Well, guess what? 6, 7, 8 years later, they're looking for exactly what you and I said they would be looking for. So, but so what, right? They're particle physicists. So what? They're trying to make out what all matter is made out of. So what is answered in this way? First of all, they're trying to figure out gluon is the overlaying of sound waves. In the beginning, God spoke. Let there be. They're trying to figure out how God called forth molecular structures from nothingness into somethingness by his spoken word. They're trying to figure out why the New Testament says that Jesus is the Word, the audible expression of God incarnate, and that all things are by him and for him, and without him was not anything made that was made, and he is holding all things together. They know that gluon is holding all things together. They know that to be true. They know that the Bible is true. But they're rebellious. They don't want to serve God. They don't want to accept him, but they know that these are actually advanced statements about particle physics that are contained within the Scripture. And frankly, it cheeses them off because they're Luciferian and they're rebellious. They're like Lucifer. Now, don't let me get off track here. So they're also looking for gravitons. Now, gravitons are the theoretical particle of which gravity is made. Why are they looking for gravitons? Well, first of all, they want to, like the God particle, they want to be able to verify that it actually exists. Theoretically, they already know it does, but they want to verify it. But then they want to watch it because gravitons, this is the weak force in nature. It's not tied down to the earth. And I'm not going to get bogged down here, but if you study string theory, most of the strong parts of the standard model of creation say that there are strings that hold everything to the earth, but gravitons are not like that. They're weak. They can escape into what they believe to be parallel universes, parallel realities. So what they are doing, and this by their own admission, this is not Tom Horn making this up, this is what the top theoretical physicists, including the director from CERN, has said that they are looking for. They want to create miniature black holes. They want to create the environment of that would be similar to the Big Bang, although they don't believe in the Big Bang no more. But they want to recreate kind of that issue, so that they can see what's happening with these gravitons. Why? Because they have evidence in some of their earlier experiments at CERN that gravitons were disappearing. They film what's happening with the breakup of these subatomic particles, and where there ought to be pieces, subatomic pieces of the proton, there seems to be a doorway there. They seem to be gone. They're going through some other reality to somewhere else. They're literally disappearing into a parallel reality. So what they're doing now, by super-energizing the CERN, is they want to make sure that those early experiments were real, and that in fact gravitons are escaping into a parallel reality. Now I want to recommend to people that are listening to this program to go to YouTube, look up Brian Greene's documentary, The Theory of Everything, which is his documentary on string theory. You'll find it there. It's 2 or 3 hours long. Fast forward in that documentary to 33 minutes. You love that, don't you, Steve? A Masonic marker. Fast forward to 33 minutes in the documentary, and listen now as physicists start explaining how, if they can prove that gravitons are escaping into a parallel universe, that gravitons then might also be, here's the important point, might be the vehicle that we can use to send messages through from our reality into that parallel reality to make contact, like sending digital strings of ones and zeros, or a high-tech Morse code, if you will, to send that through to say we are here, and then to wait and see if we have something that comes back that says, we're here too. Or maybe as Steve Quayle might phrase it, we'll be right there to eat you. But that's what we're doing. And this is why Sergio Bertolucci, the director of CERN, has said that we are intending to open up a doorway. That's what he said. And he said we might send something through it. That's what he's talking about. We're going to try to figure out how to use gravitons to communicate with this parallel reality. He said we're going to open a doorway. We're going to send something through. But he said something might also come through that doorway back into our world. That's exactly what they are trying to do. at CERN. They are literally trying to find the keys that will open the doorway, the stargate, the portal that will allow this other reality to come through. And now they're working on other experiments. They're looking for dark matter, which Chris was talking about a moment ago. They're searching for tiny black holes they think could be gateways to these parallel universes, alternate dimensions. And the hope is that in the meantime, they're not going to open up something that could literally unleash hell on Earth, because 13 TeV, 13 tera electron volts, I would just challenge the listener, go out and look that up to understand what that means. There has never been anything that has even come close, not even close, to the power of the experiments that we are going to begin in about 7 days from today.
Chris. Hey, Chris?
He's still connected with us.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
There you go.
Are you
I
there,
can
Chris?
keep talking if I need to.
No, I'm here.
Chris, go ahead,
Okay.
Chris. Take your time.
Well, yeah,
Okay, the
I was
questioning-
looking back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Hello?
you.
Okay. I thought there was another problem with the mute button or something. Okay, yeah. I was looking at our notes here. We're talking about CERN. We're talking about, the particle physics, looking at the very small. So we're looking at this on one end of the picture. On the other end of the picture, we went up to Mount Graham. We're looking at astronomy. We're looking at the big, the macroscopic. We're looking at black holes and things of this nature. And it's really quite astounding when you see that it's coming from both ends of the spectrum. We had articles coming out just as the book was going to the publisher. An article came out saying the Milky Way galaxy could be one great galactic transport system, that every spiral-shaped galaxy is actually a black hole, is actually a wormhole. And then another paper came out saying that every black hole that they see could really be a wormhole. And these papers are coming out just like in the last few months. Right at the same time, you have the very small, the particles, the physics going on at CERN. And, you hear these statements coming out that we could create a wormhole. Now, interestingly, when they talk about making a traversable wormhole, if we were going to try to manufacture such a thing, big enough for a spaceship or a human being or something like that to go through, they would actually start it at the very small. So, like the work that's being done at CERN, the way you make a traversable wormhole, at least in theory, and this is what all the greatest minds would say on this, is that you start by puncturing it at the very small level with one of these particles, and then you start to stretch it. And there's different ways that they propose to do that. But the idea is that you kind of stretch this thing out, and it gets bigger and bigger until you make it large enough to go through. So you actually need the particle physics part of it to make the puncture between the two levels. And that's some of the stuff they're looking at CERN is have they done that. And you had, Sergio Bartolucci, he said, out of this door something might come through. We might send something through it. Direct quote from the director at CERN saying that. And then right after that, all the newspapers and the scientific papers were talking about all these science fiction ideas of netherworlds and dwarves coming through and dragons. And they're making fun of the whole idea. Yet at the same time, they're absolutely laying the groundwork for something like that to come to pass. If there really is another world with beings that they're not prepared for. So they're kind of looking at it, like the tongue-in-cheek sort of thing, yet they're very much doing the work. And at the same time, we have these astronomers. And this is really what I found fascinating, is that they're talking about every spiral galaxy is actually a galactic transport system, meaning that there is some sort of black hole, traversable wormhole to get to like any part of the galaxy or to another spiral galaxy. That spiral galaxies perhaps interconnect. So these are very scientifically respectable ideas. So we're talking about how does this, affect, the thesis in our book, we're talking about who are the immortals. People wonder that right off the bat. Well, I don't really like the term angels so much because it's really just a alliteration of the Greek term angelos, which means messenger. And typically, God would send messengers, like in the Gospels, like when the stone was rolled away from the tomb, and they look like human beings, and they bring messages, like Gabriel did to Daniel when he was praying. He appeared as a brilliantly shining man, but very much like a man. But yet we see all these other beings in the Bible, like the seraphim, and then so a lot of people might kind of recoil at the idea that we're talking about reptilians. Well, the seraphim are reptilians, and scholars pretty much universally agree with this, that they are flying reptilian beings. And so, Tom mentioned earlier that we talked about these plumed serpent deities down in Mesoamerica. Well, we know that some of these angelic beings, these divine beings, these beings from the divine realm, rebelled against God. Well, we see these flying serpent beings in God's throne room called the seraphim. Well, in Isaiah, that same term appears later in the book, but they don't just say seraphim. They call it, like in the King James, it says fiery flying serpent. It's the exact same term in Hebrew, seraphim. It just depends on the context. If they're fallen, it appears that our translators have kind of made a decision for us. It's almost like somewhat of a obfuscation, I think, because when they're in the throne room of God, they just call them seraphim, and it kind of masks the truth that they are reptilian beings, even there, and then later they use the same term, they'll just translate it as fiery flying serpent, but it's absolutely the same word that Isaiah used when he was in the throne room of God. So the existence of, flying serpent beings is a biblical idea. It's right there in Isaiah, and it appears all throughout the Bible, but in the Old Testament, every time you see a seraphim mentioned, that is a reptilian. There's really universal agreement on that with Semitic language scholars. So, when you go down to Mesoamerica and you see these peoples are worshiping plumed serpent deities, I mean, it's pretty clear to me that this is the same sort of divine being that, Isaiah saw in the throne room, but it's a fallen divine being. It's a divine being that's accepting worship, it's presenting itself as a god, and it's absolutely commanding blood sacrifice, human sacrifice. And it's really not that surprising when you put the big picture together. But that, Quetzalcoatl is a fallen seraphim, from the Hebrew Bible. So, we make that argument in the book. And so, like I said, angelos is a messenger, yet we see seraphim, we see cherubim, and these are fierce-looking creatures. A cherubim is not something that God would send as a messenger because it would scare the piss out of whoever it showed up to. And, that is absolutely a biblical idea as well.
And I would add, Chris.
I got to stop.
Chris, talking about people having the pee-pee scared up. These seraphim, that's exactly what Dr. Mose described. It's exactly what the Apache and the Hopi described, but it's also what we show in our film, our exclusive film that we shot of the petroglyphs. And when we went down into the petroglyphs, we hired a Cherokee guide to take us into places where the public can't go. We went actually literally past a locked gate where you can't go. And I got to tell you something about something else you told me in a minute, Steve. Don't let me forget about the Fifth World. But he takes us down there. We shoot film petroglyphs that were drawn as early as maybe 1,000 years before Christ, and it shows the spiral vortex, right, Chris? The spiral vortex, the tornado, if you will, and next to it, a giant reptilian creature with a halo around its head coming through the spiral vortex. Right next to that giant six-toed footprints in pursuit of smaller five-toed footprints. And when you couldn't stand there and look at these ancient petroglyphs that were drawn at the same time Moses was writing the Old Testament, and not understand that the phenomenon that was occurring on the earth was global. It was worldwide. And that, by the way, is why there had to be a universal flood, not just a Middle East flood. It had to be worldwide, because all flesh, the Scripture says, both man and beast, had become corrupted. But these seraphim that were here in the U.S., and the ones that Chris is talking about in the Hebrew Old Testament, and the fact that they're terrifying, it doesn't make me feel much better when we're talking about CERN and what they're trying to do at CERN, to know that dedicated right outside of the headquarters there is Shiva, the very entity you guys were talking about, the deity, the Indian entity that destroys at the molecular level and rebuilds at the molecular level. But what I would challenge people to do is go and go to Wikipedia and look up the Shiva statue that is standing there. Blow up the image until you can read the dedicatory that is on the bottom of that statue. That's the part that'll blow you away, because the statue isn't just there. The statue is dedicated as the omnipresent God. Instead of Jehovah, this Shiva is dedicated as the omnipresent God. Additionally, CERN is actually located in St. Genus Quayle. Now, this is a township in eastern France. It lies on the border with Switzerland. It's nestled into the foothills of the Jura Mountains and Lake Geneva. This Quayle was actually established by the Romans in ancient times as, guess what, Apaliacum. It literally served as a location for a temple to Apollo or Apollyon, which is listed in the book of Revelation as belonging to the king of the hybrid fallen creatures that rise up out of the pit. This is literally the king, Abaddon, Apollyon, of those who are beneath the surface of the earth, behind that gateway that's going to open up when Revelation 9 unfolds, and a star having a key to the bottomless pit descends to the earth and opens that bottomless pit. So I'm telling you, this is kind of concerning to me that this is where CERN is operating, that they are attempting to find the key to a doorway, even admitting it. They're talking about it publicly. It's exactly what they want to do. They want to make contact with another reality. And yet the Bible, thousands of years ago, saying that this was exactly what was going to happen, but it actually says that this Apollyon is going to rise up out of the bottomless pit, and he's going to actually enter into the Antichrist and become the king of the end times New World Order.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? We're talking about necromancers, if you use the word Rapha, Chris, out of, the Hebrew, the dead, or Rephaim, the dead, but isn't it, I got a new word for you guys, okay? Where in the old days we used to have necromancers, now we've got technomancers, okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, people that are usually, how do I say this? They're using the very technology of the fallen ones to release the fallen ones to make war against God. I want to read something, because this will blow everyone's mind. For those who don't think the Bible's relevant or contemporary or can deal with issues like this, let me read Colossians, the first chapter, the 6 verses. This is really important. Written by, obviously, Paul to the Colossians. Giving thanks unto the Father, which has made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness and has translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son, in whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins. Now look at that. Who hath delivered us from the power of darkness. There is a power in darkness and has translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. God is giving the contrast, and Paul is actually giving the contrast in Colossians of the difference between light and darkness. Who is the image? It's talking about Jesus, of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. For by him, Jesus, were all things created that are in heaven, that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. I believe, Tom, Chris, that gravity is a pressure, and I believe the very power. If you say power and put your hand up to your mouth, that's a stop plosive, and that power is literally the word of God is a gluon. Okay, and I believe that the absolute, and I don't know how it's going to happen, but at some point, here's something that we'll see it comes to pass. The relationship between sound and light beyond lasers and masers, I'm not talking about that, the very harmonics of the universe. You guys, you can go on YouTube and you can listen to the different sounds that are emitted. It talks about the morning stars singing together. Well, the point being in all this, and this is where we're getting for, is dark matter has a presence. Even when Kurzweil wrote WROTE, his book on spiritual machines, it's kind of like a Stephen King novel. The question is that what happens when, how do I say this, the transform point, the point between the spirit world and the physical world, is bridged to such an extent that everything, Tom, everything, Chris, that we've known as what we see or as we perceive as existence comes into our dimension. When the invisible becomes visible, when the principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness, and by the way, I think they just go on vacation in Washington, D.C., okay? But the point being, I really do. And someday we'll do a show on that. But the point being is that we're now in a time period unlike any other. And I always love the words of Jesus, because I think every statement he makes is infinite in the dimension and meaning and depth. And to the degree we seek him, he reveals a new, if you will, like an onion skin, he reveals a new level. But what we're talking about right now is we're talking about the very technology that was used in the ancient wars, obviously the Indian Vedic texts, all of their epics. Fascinating, Tom. I think you and I talked about this at your house when I was there last week, and Chris, I think you did. But the point being is that even the Indian astronomers and the Indian rocket scientists, and they showed up at a NASA interstellar conference with ancient Sanskrit description about how Vimana flying machines flew, how to fly the Vimana flying machines, what the fuel sources were, and everything else, and it kind of got, isn't that silly? Well, it's not silly at all. And now from what you've said tonight, Tom, I will say this again. Chris, I will say this. I believe tonight what you shared about Iraq, and I just filled in a few minor details, is absolutely a pivotal and seminal turning point. Because at some point, they're going to bring out some of the ancient technology. They're going to show it us, and they're going to say it was left to us by our creator benefactors, who, by the way, just happened to come from the Pleiades or whatever, The point being is that when they start to pull that, then that brings us to the other question I want to give to you tonight, Tom. When you were explain who showed up at Mount Graham when that guy told you about it, because I don't think you've ever said that until just you told me that last week, and if I missed that, I missed it. But who showed up in his helicopter at Mount Graham?
I don't think I know what we're talking about.
Well, didn't you tell me that you talked to somebody that said the Pope came in?
Oh yeah. Actually, we were on our way up the mountain. Sorry, I faded out there for a moment. We were on our way up the mountain. We stopped at it was I don't know, like a public parks building that had been built during the Great Depression.
It looked like a house. Yeah.
What's that?
It looked like a small home, actually. That maybe someone had lived there in the past. If you remember, had a fireplace. It was kind of cozy and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we went inside there to have our lunch while we were on our way up. But here was the mysterious part about all that: is that the old guy that was in there, he was tending a fire, he was taking care of the facility. It was built during the Great Depression, some of the works programs. And so we're sitting there. He wants to know where we're going. And we mentioned to him we were going up to Mount Graham, and right out of the blue, he starts telling us about how the Pope had actually been brought to the top of Mount Graham inside of a helicopter. We're sitting there like, why is this guy telling us this stuff, right? But he knew. He worked there. He worked for the Parks Department. And he was aware that the Pope had actually been brought to the top of Mount Graham. So, yeah, that actually happened, Steve.
Well, and then fill in the blanks. People go, well, why would the Pope be brought there? The answer is he had to see what the instruments had located, which goes right back to what you guys have been writing about, and when you were interviewing the Vatican astronomers and who they're looking for. I mean, and I want to say this, he was looking for his first glimpse of Lucifer.
Yeah, and so let me say a couple of things, if I can, real fast.
Take the time, because this is critical. I mean, this has got to be putting it in perspective, because when Tim Alberino comes on your show on Skywatch TV, and when we get the trailer out, we're going to basically be showing people that this is the most key controlled information in the world that is absolutely guarded at the expense of people's lives. So go ahead and say what you're going to say.
Okay, so I know we're going to run out of time, so very quickly.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Let me just ask this one question here, because we're getting a lot of emails about this. Can you just clarify which pope this was, and give me an approximate time frame?
I would assume this was Pope Benedict XVI, because that's when we went up to the top of the mountain, and he spoke as if that had happened very recently, which was very kind of suspicious, if you will, because if Pope Benedict, we had already predicted that Pope Benedict was going to step down. Why would he have flown to the top of Mount Graham to be shown something, which we absolutely have no idea what that was, but we assume that it might have been connected to what Malachi Martin had been talking about, that they are using the technology on the top of Mount Graham to monitor something that is approaching the Earth. Now, we have no way of vetting whether this guy was telling the truth or not, but we also know that he was not there to meet with us. He didn't even know we was coming. We just showed up. And while we're standing there in this building halfway up the mountain onto the top of Mount Graham, he just blurts out and tells us how that the Pope had recently been brought in a helicopter to the top of Mount Graham. He was aware of it. And he worked for the State Parks Department. So we were just kind of surprised. I don't even know that we included that in our book, but Chris would verify that that's exactly what he told us happened. And so we were kind of surprised by it.
Well, Tom, thank you. Thank you for that. Now, I just want to say this, and I didn't mean to take you off track. Steve, you'll love this. We've got an unprecedented listenership coming out of the area of Rome, Italy right now. We can monitor, IP blocks listenership. So Tom, Chris, and Steve,
well,
just so you know, you got some fans there.
And Doug, so let me say something directly to those that are listening to us now out of Rome. I was contacted by a priest, and we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. He said, watch what Pope Francis does in the encyclical that is coming out. It's going to be talking about the environment. He's going to issue an encyclical, which is very important to the Roman Catholics because it's kind of a moral imperative. It's going to tell them what they should or shouldn't do. It's going to be sent to all the bishops around the world who are going to send it to the 1.2 billion Catholics that are around the world. And already he is using language saying that the environmental issue is going to be a moral imperative. These are loaded words. When you hear a pope use language like moral imperative, this becomes kind of an enforcement, if you will. It's a very important document. So here's what I was told, to watch the language and see if the language is going to infer anything that has to do with what the Vatican's theologians right now are referring to as many worlds. This is something Guy Consolmagno, Jose Gabriel Funes, the Pope himself, who has degrees in science and actually had ambitions concerning astrobiology before he became a Jesuit, they would understand what this many worlds actually means. But the average listener out there might not, so let me explain it. Many worlds is this idea that there are many worlds, and that on these many worlds, exo-worlds out there, there are many other human-like people. When Jesus said, I have other sheep you know not of, that's what they're talking about. There are other worlds with people on them. They may be morally superior to us, but they're all watching, and we are only one of a coalition of worlds. Now, this is just a theory, but doctrine is being written around it. And that the time may come when we may be contacted by these other worlds to warn us that we are becoming a danger to the environmental condition of the earth. Let me give you a different explanation that'll make people understand this. Remember the old movie that came out in the 50s or 60s, whenever it came out, called The Day the Earth Stood Still? Remember that? And this was the first time that the world learned that it was actually only one of a coalition of worlds, and that we were being watched by others. And in the old original black and white, the idea was that we had developed nuclear technology that could, expand beyond our world to other places. And so the aliens were coming here with Klaatu Barada Nikto, the alien and his big robot, to let us know that if we ever thought we were going to expand our nuclear threat beyond the Earth, we would be reduced to a burned-out cinder. That's what the old original black and white said. Well, that movie was remade a couple of years ago with Keanu Reeves. And in the remake, they picked up the theme of many worlds in that the alien comes with his giant robot to let us know that humans now are the virus. We are the problem. We are destroying the environment. We are destroying the world. The whole message had to do with the whole greening, theology. And that we're going to have to be destroyed now because humans can't be turned around. We're wiping out Gaia, Mother Earth, and the Earth is more important than the humans that may live on top of it, according to the many Earths theory. So now, if you see the movie, somewhere in there, I think they convince the alien that maybe humans can repent, maybe humans can become more conducive to the whole, environmental situation. So what this Catholic was wanting me to know is watch the language that's going to come in the Pope's encyclical and note if there's any language in there that has to do with this many Earths theory. Because if there is, then where he is coming from has to do with an extraterrestrial worldview, an extraterrestrial point of view, that we are only one of many worlds, and we have a responsibility to the other worlds, and they're watching, the angels, the aliens, the whatever, they're watching, and we're going to be held responsible for the human ecological impact on the earth. So now we're going to get the Pope's encyclical by summer. Originally they had said it was going to come out in March. Now they're saying it's going to come out by summer. Bottom line is we're going to get it, and we'll find out what the Pope is talking about. But the point is, this Pope, he's a Jesuit, and I think he is connected to something that has to do with ET, Stargate concepts, portals. I say that because he has a historic relationship with the members of the Borg that most of the world don't even know about. Cris Putnam actually was able to track this down. He's connected to the Vatican Observatory Research Group. As a young adult, he earned a master's degree in chemistry from the University of Buenos Aires. He had scientific ambitions prior to entering the Jesuit order. Secondly, when the current leader of the Borg, Jose Gabriel Funes, entered the Jesuit order, one of his examiners was Pope Francis Bergoglio. So you have this relationship going back for a long time. But then thirdly, in a recent interview with the Catholic press, Jose Funes said about his personal friend, Pope Francis, he said he is going to soon turn his attention to issues of astrobiology. So there is something that is coming. It's coming. This Pope's going to make it either in this encyclical or in some authoritative document following that. He's going to make some commentary that's actually going to tie back to this work on the path of the immortals, doorways of the earth, extraterrestrial intelligence. So, as always, we're going to run out of time.
Yep.
There's a lot of things we could say about what the Bible says about the earth being a holding tank. That's a biblical fact. It's the Old Testament paradise location, Sheol, Hades, but it goes much further than that. Job 26:5 talks about the Raphaim squirming beneath the surface of the earth in anticipation of their resurrection. So there's just so much information we didn't have time to cover tonight. Secondly, not only is the earth dynamic, prophecy. Revelation 9, the fifth angel sounds, the bottomless pit is opened, things come up out of the earth. Also Isaiah 13, a command is given, the gates of the earth open, giants come to fulfill the wrath. But what we didn't have time to talk about was how Enoch and his 70 generations prophecy actually puts the timing of when those gates are going to open to right now, essentially right now. The very moment we're living in, according to ancient biblical prophecy, is the moment when the doorways of the earth are going to open. I wish we would have had time to also talk about the Babylon working, because the Babylon working, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, they wrote, Parsons wrote in his biography how the spirit of Babylon was incarnated in a female child, 1947, who would rise up to assume prominence as a feminist in the world, and only one person fits that goal, who is probably the leading candidate for the next president of the United States of America, born exactly when the Babylon working said that she would be, and that's Hillary Clinton. I don't know that that's going to turn out to be true, but that's a fact.
Yes, it is.
So, just like always, we're out of time. So I'll just tell people, if they want to get the Path of the Immortals, we have a promo going on at skywatchtv.com, $200 worth of books, free DVD, movies. One of those is not available anywhere. It's the 2.5-hour special investigative report on the Path of the Immortals. You can't get it anywhere else. We're giving it away free. We're also giving away the free Ahriman Gate 8-hour audio book. So a lot of stuff. If you want to check it out, go to skywatchtv.com. You'll see the banner there with the countdown clock on the top of the website, and you can check that out if you want to learn more about all of the information that we didn't get time to talk about tonight.
Well, I think Doug, at some time, if we can pull it off with Blog Talk, and Tom is open to it, and Chris, I think that, I'm serious. I think we need to do, and this isn't just a cursory or silly statement on my part. I have longed for a time where we could go 6 hours, okay, straight, because it one thing leads to another. Tom and I talk about that. We get off a show like this and go, why didn't we get that? Well, it wasn't time, but based on the email you just sent me, there are a lot of people. Tom, I just sent this to you, but as Doug said, the largest listening block from Greater Rome. Now you'll love this: Maryland and Virginia. It looks like the entire intelligence agency has come in. .mil, .gov addresses are there. They don't care about hiding their IPs. Now let me share something with everybody, especially you guys in the mill industrial complex, and all of you in the intelligence community, and all of you in the religious community worldwide. There is a God who is holy, who sits in heaven, who spoke the worlds into existence. No one can know what the king thinks on his bed in the night, as the dreams that either trouble and form pass through his consciousness or subconsciousness. But what you're hearing tonight, all of you listening in, are the absolute truths that will fill out, not only will fill the pages of history in the future, but play out before your very eyes. The striking thing to me, Tom, is that even though people that are, and I'm told by the Special Forces community that you have to be acclimated into this world, because once you start seeing this stuff, it totally it does stuff to your mind. Okay, God in His infinite love, in His mercy, Jesus in His amazing blood has kept this stuff from our dimension for our safety. But because men are playing God, because men, and by the way, it was the standing seraphim that Chris talked about that was the one that bewitched Eve, okay, or beguiled her is a better word. And so the fact is that now you've got an entire world or a cosmological theater playing out before the eyes and ears of everyone, with even people who are participants maybe totally knowing, but even those who think that they've plumbed the depths of hell, they're not ready for what's going to be coming. So, Doug and Joe, thank you. Chris, do you want to sign us? You got about 2 minutes before we go.
Okay. Sure. Thanks, Steve. Jesus, in Luke 21:25, he says, "There will be signs in the sun and moon and stars and on the earth, distress of nations and perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear and foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken." That day, looms in our future, and people are unprepared. I mean, the Bible tells us that. As in the days of Noah, they just go on marrying like everything is normal, and the day of judgment is coming closer and closer, and that's what we're really trying to make a reality. That's what we want people to wake up and become aware of. That there are good reasons to take this stuff seriously, and our book will point you to some of those reasons and why we think that time is very close, and people need to be prepared. It's been a privilege to be on with you guys, and as always, it's always a thrill.
Well, Doug, the last thing I'll say 1 minute's worth is this. In order to understand all of history, how it's going to play out, the book of Genesis, in the beginning, lays it all out. Whether it's Genesis 3:15, the war between the powers of darkness and God's redeemed or the redeemed of the Lord. And I would just encourage people who really want to get a handle on this, that when I was led to go back and do Genesis 6 Giants Volume 2, it was because there were facts and things I did not know that were not to be revealed at that time. I'm not saying God couldn't reveal through someone else. I'm just saying it wasn't revealed. So I'd encourage everybody to get that book, because it will answer your questions. And then you couple it. See, where I left off, look at this. God raises up Tom and Chris to carry on the path of the Immortals. So the point is that, I would encourage all of you from all over the world, even those of you guys that think, you've bought the party line, at least you owe it to yourself and your souls for eternity to see if these things be true. Doug, God bless you. God bless Joe. Thank you, guys. You're just gentlemen to let us go totally, where the Lord led us, and may the Lord God of heaven bless you richly.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks for handling this telephonic roundtable. We really appreciate it. Mr. Putnam, God bless you. Your book, your work's fantastic. And Mr. Horn, Skywatch TV, man, I'll tell you, you folks are really taking the world by storm. And we just want to say thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you all on our show. And please do come back. And Steve, we'll make that 6-hour marathon happen. I guarantee it.
Are you open to that, Tom?
Oh, sure, yeah, would be. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll do it then, Doug.
All right, take care. That'll do it for us tonight, folks. Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, and Cris Putnam. What a fantastic show! This show will be available via archive in 15-20 minutes after the show ends. God bless everyone. Joe, thanks for everything.
Yep. Till tomorrow. Have a good night. God bless. Stay safe.